What would you do if you grew up with nothing? No money, no stability, no one to show you the way. Most people in that situation give up before they even start. But one woman took everything life threw at her and used it to build something that nobody saw coming. This is her story. Today we are talking about a book that is unlike anything you have probably read before. The name of this book is Stripped Down, Unfiltered and Unapologetic, and it is written by the incredible Bunnie Xo, also known as Elisa DeFord, a New York Times best-selling author, successful entrepreneur, and host of one of the most downloaded podcasts in the world, the Dumb Blonde Podcast. This book is her real story. No filters, no sugarcoating, just raw, honest, and unfiltered truth about where she came from, what she went through, and exactly how she turned the most painful chapters of her life into her greatest strengths. We are going to cover this book, chapter by chapter, so you do not miss a single lesson, a single story, or a single moment that made this book a New York Times bestseller. So if you are ready to be inspired, challenged, and completely moved, make sure you watch this video till the very end. Because this story is going to remind you that no matter where you start, where you finish, is entirely up to you. Chapter 1. Meet Bunnie Xo, the girl behind the name. Let me ask you something. When you hear the name Bunnie Xo, what comes to mind? Maybe you know her from social media. Maybe you have listened to her podcast. Maybe you have seen her name next to her husband, the award-winning musician Jelly Roll. But here is the thing. Behind the name, behind the personality, behind the smile that lights up every screen she appears on, there is a real person. A person who has been through things that most people cannot even imagine. A person who grew up with nothing, lost herself completely along the way, and somehow, against every possible odd, found her way back. Her real name is Elisa DeFord, and today we are going to meet the real her. Not the polished version. Not the successful podcaster. Not the entertainer with millions of followers. The real her. The one who started at the very bottom. The one who fell even lower before she could rise. The one who decided, one day, that her story deserved to be told. All of it. Unfiltered. Unapologetic. Stripped down. Who is Elisa DeFord and how did she become Bunnie Xo? Elisa DeFord did not grow up in a world of opportunity. She did not have parents who sat her down and told her that she could be anything she wanted to be. She did not have a comfortable home, a stable childhood, or a safety net to fall back on. She grew up in the trailer parks of Las Vegas, and if you have never seen that side of Vegas, it is a world away from the bright lights and the casinos that most people imagine when they hear that city's name. It is a world of struggle, of survival, of people just trying to get through the day. And that was the world that Elisa was born into. From the very beginning, life was hard. The people who were supposed to protect her did not. The stability that every child deserves was simply not there, and instead of being surrounded by love and guidance, she was surrounded by chaos, by dysfunction, by a reality that forced her to grow up far too quickly. Now here is what is important to understand. Elisa did not let that define her. Not forever, but it did shape her. Every child is shaped by the environment they grow up in. Every experience, every moment of love or the lack of it, everything that happens in those early years, leaves a mark. And for Elisa, those marks were deep. They sent her down a road that became darker before it became lighter. But through all of it, there was something inside of her. Something stubborn. something that refused to disappear. A spark, a voice, a quiet but persistent belief that she was meant for something more. And that spark is what eventually became Bunnie Xo. The name Bunnie Xo did not come from nowhere. It came from a journey, a long, painful, messy, beautiful journey of a woman figuring out who she really was. And when she finally found that person, she did not hide her. She celebrated her. She built a platform for her. She gave that person a voice, a microphone, and a podcast that millions of people now tune into every single week. Because it turns out that the world was hungry for exactly the kind of honesty that Bunnie Xo was finally ready to give. Why she decided to write this raw and unfiltered memoir. Now let us talk about the book itself. Because writing a memoir is not a small thing. It is not just sitting down and telling funny stories about your life. A real memoir requires something much harder than that. It requires honesty. Real, uncomfortable, sometimes painful honesty. The kind of honesty that means looking back at the worst moments of your life and not just acknowledging them, but putting them on a page for the entire world to read. So why did Bunnie Xo do it? Why did she decide to write this book? The answer is actually very simple. She wrote it because she needed it to exist. Not for herself. For the people out there who are living the life she once lived. The people who grew up with nothing. The people who made choices they are ashamed of. The people who fell into addiction, into toxic relationships, into a version of themselves that they barely recognize. The people who look at their life and think, is it too late for me? Am I too broken to be fixed? Has too much happened for things to ever get better? Bunnie Xo wrote this book to look those people directly in the eye and say no. It is not too late. You are not too broken. And things can get better. She knows because she lived it. She was that person. She was the one who had every reason to give up. And she did not. And because she did not give up, she now has a story worth telling. A story that does not just entertain. A story that genuinely helps people, that gives people hope when hope feels impossible, that reminds people that redemption is real and that it is available to every single person who decides they want it. She also wrote this book because she was tired of half-truth, tired of watching people share only the highlight reel of their lives, tired of the polished, perfect, carefully edited version of success that dominates so much of social media. She wanted to show people the full picture, the struggle alongside the success, the pain alongside the victory, the mess alongside the achievement, because she believes that real stories, messy, honest, unfiltered real stories, are far more powerful than perfect ones. And she was right. The promise she makes to readers. Before you even get through the first pages of this book, Bunnie Xo makes you a promise. And it is a promise that she keeps every single page. The promise is this: no filters, no sugarcoating, no carefully edited version of events, designed to make her look better than she was. Just the truth. All of it. Even the parts that are hard to read. Even the parts that are shocking. Even the parts where she made choices that she is not proud of. She puts all of it on the table. And she does it with a combination of honesty, humor, and self-awareness that makes you feel like you are sitting across from a real person, not reading a carefully constructed public image. Because Bunnie Xo understands something that a lot of people forget. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is actually one of the most powerful things a person can offer another person. When you share your real story, when you take off the mask, and let people see who you actually are, where you actually came from, what you actually went through, something incredible happens. People feel less alone. People recognize themselves in your story. People realize that the things they are most ashamed of are the things that actually connect them to other human beings. And that connection is healing. That connection is what changes lives. So Bunnie Xo made a decision. She decided to be completely, totally, unapologetically real, because she knew that her realness was exactly what someone out there needed. Someone who was struggling, someone who was lost, someone who needed proof that you can come from nothing, go through everything, and still end up somewhere beautiful. And that proof is this book. What this book is really about. So let us be very clear about what Stripped Down actually is. It is not just a celebrity memoir. It is not just a collection of interesting stories from a famous person's life. It is a message about redemption, about the fact that no matter how deep you fall, you can always rise, about the fact that your past does not have to be your permanent address, about the fact that the very things that tried to destroy you can become the foundation of something extraordinary. Bunnie Xo went from the trailer parks of Vegas to the mansions of Nashville. But more importantly, she went from a person who had completely lost herself to a person who found herself completely. And that journey is what this book is about. Not the money, not the fame, not the podcast numbers, or the business success. The inner journey, the healing, the moment she decided that she deserved better, and then actually did the work to create it. So now you have met the real Bunnie Xo. Not just the name, the person behind it, the girl who started with nothing, the woman who went through everything, and the author who decided that her story was worth telling completely, honestly, without a single filter. And in the next chapter, we are going to go back to the very beginning, to the trailer parks of Las Vegas, to the childhood that started it all, to the world that shaped Elisa DeFord long before she ever became Bunnie Xo. So stay with me, because this story is just getting started, and I promise you it is going to be unlike anything you have ever heard. Chapter 2, Born into Chaos. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Actually, do not close them, because you need to keep reading. But I want you to imagine something. Imagine being a child, small, innocent, and completely dependent on the adults around you. Now imagine that the world you were born into was not safe, not warm, not stable. Imagine that instead of waking up to breakfast on the table, and a parent asking how you slept, you woke up to uncertainty, to noise, to chaos, to a home that never really felt like a home at all. Imagine that the people who were supposed to be your safe place were actually the source of your fear. Now imagine carrying that, not for a day, not for a week, but for your entire childhood. That was the reality of Elisa DeFord. That was the world she was born into. And today, we are going back to the very beginning, to the trailer parks of Las Vegas, to the childhood that shaped everything, to the little girl who needed so much and received so little. Because before you can understand how Bunnie Xo rose, you have to understand just how deep the hole was that she had to climb out of. Growing up in the trailer parks of Las Vegas. When most people think of Las Vegas, they think of bright lights. They think of casinos, hotels, entertainment, and excitement. They think of a city that never sleeps, a city full of possibility. But there is another Las Vegas, one that does not make it onto the postcards, one that exists, far away from the glamour and the glitter. It is the Las Vegas of trailer parks, and struggling families, and children who grow up knowing that life is hard before they are old enough to fully understand why. That was Elisa's Las Vegas. She did not grow up near the Strip. She did not grow up watching the lights from a hotel window. She grew up in a world where money was always tight, where stability was always just out of reach, and where the basic things that most children take for granted were simply not available. Think about what that actually means for a child. It means not knowing if there will be food on the table. It means watching the adults around you struggle, fight, and fall apart and not understanding why. It means growing up with a kind of low-level anxiety that never really goes away, a constant feeling that the ground beneath you is never quite solid, that things could fall apart at any moment. And for Elisa, they often did. Poverty does something to a person, not just to their bank account, to their mind, to their sense of self, to the way they see themselves and the world around them. When you grow up with nothing, you start to believe that nothing is what you deserve. You start to internalize the lack. You start to carry it, not just in your pockets, but in your heart. And Elisa, from the very beginning, was carrying more weight than any child should ever have to carry. But the poverty was only part of it, because what made her childhood truly difficult was not just the lack of money. It was the lack of safety, the lack of love, the lack of the one thing that every child needs more than anything else: adults who actually showed up for her. A childhood marked by neglect, poverty, and instability. Let us talk about what neglect actually looks like, because when most people hear that word, they picture something obvious, something extreme. But neglect is not always dramatic. Sometimes neglect is quiet. Sometimes it looks like a parent who is physically present but emotionally completely absent. Sometimes it looks like a child who learns very early that their feelings do not matter, that their needs are an inconvenience, that asking for help or attention or love is more trouble than it is worth. For Elisa, neglect was woven into the fabric of her daily life. It was in the instability, the constant moving, the feeling of never being settled anywhere long enough to feel at home. It was in the inconsistency of the adults around her. The moments where love seemed possible, followed quickly by chaos, by fighting, by the kind of unpredictability that keeps a child in a constant state of alert, always watching, always waiting, always trying to read the room, to figure out what kind of day it was going to be. And poverty made all of this worse, because when there is no money, stress fills the space that money should occupy. And stress, in a home, does not stay with the adults. It trickles down. It lands on the children, on their small shoulders, on their developing minds, on the way they learn to understand themselves and the world. Elisa grew up understanding that the world was not a safe place, that people were not reliable, that love, when it came, could be taken away just as quickly, and she learned to protect herself, not in healthy ways, not in ways that a child with proper guidance would learn, but in the only ways available to her: by becoming tough, by shutting parts of herself down, by learning to need less, so that the disappointment of not getting it would hurt less. These are not skills that serve a child well, but they are the skills that children in chaos develop, because survival is always the first priority. And for Elisa, survival started very young. The adults who were supposed to protect her, but did not, Now let us talk about the hardest part of this chapter. The people, who were supposed to be there for Elisa, and were not. Because one of the most painful things about a difficult childhood is not just the circumstances. It is the people, the specific human beings, who were supposed to be your protectors, your guides, your safe harbor, and chose, for whatever reason, not to be. Elisa's mother struggled deeply with mental health, with her own battles, that she was never equipped to fight properly. And when a parent is fighting their own war, they often do not have the capacity to show up fully for their children. That does not make it right. That does not make it any less painful. But it does explain how a child can be failed by someone who may have loved them but simply did not have the tools to show it properly. The absence of a mother's consistent love leaves a wound, a deep one that does not heal quickly, one that shapes the way a child sees themselves for years, sometimes for a lifetime. And then there was her father, whose choices created a completely different kind of pain. A pain that was not just about absence, but about betrayal, about the kind of thing that a daughter should never have to experience from the person who was supposed to be her protector. Bunnie Xo shares these details with honesty and courage in her book. She does not dress them up. She does not protect the people who did not protect her. She simply tells the truth, because the truth is the only way to actually process something, the only way to look at it clearly, understand it fully, and eventually find a way to move forward from it. And here is what I want you to take from this. The adults in Elisa's life failed her, not because she was unworthy of love, not because she was difficult, not because she deserved what happened, but because they were broken people, carrying their own unhealed wounds and passing them down, the way broken people often do. This is one of the most important lessons in this entire book. The things that are done to us, especially in childhood, are not a reflection of our worth. They are a reflection of the struggles of the people who did them, and understanding that distinction is often the first step toward healing. What this childhood created. So what does a childhood like this actually create? What does it do to a person when the very foundation of their life is built on chaos? It creates a child who does not know how to trust, because the people who were supposed to be trustworthy were not. It creates a child who does not know their own worth, because nobody around them took the time to show them. It creates a child who is always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because in their experience, it always did. And it creates a child who is incredibly resilient, not by choice but by necessity, because when you have no one to lean on, you learn to stand on your own, even when you are not ready, even when you are scared, even when every part of you just wants someone to step in and take the weight for a little while. Elisa DeFord was all of these things. She was wounded. She was lost. She was carrying things that no child should ever have to carry. But she was also, even then, even in the very beginning, stronger than she knew. That strength would be tested many times over, in ways that would bring her to her absolute lowest point, before it would finally carry her to the heights she was always meant to reach. So now we understand where Elisa DeFord came from. We have seen the trailer parks. We have felt the instability. We have understood the weight of growing up in a world that did not protect her the way it should have. And now, we are going to follow her into the next chapter of her story. Because what happens next is where things get even harder, where the wounds of childhood start to make decisions for her, where the little girl who grew up in chaos starts to run, not toward something, away from everything, And that chapter is one that Bunnie Xo shares, with a level of honesty that will leave you breathless. So stay with me, because the story is just getting deeper, and the lessons are just getting more powerful. Chapter 3: A Home That Never Felt Like Home. I want you to think about the word home. Not just a building, not just four walls and a roof. The feeling of home. That warm, safe, settled feeling where you know that you are loved. Where you know that the people around you are on your side. Where you can let your guard down completely because you are protected. Where you can be yourself, without fear, without performance, without constantly watching for what might come next. Every child deserves that feeling. Every single one. It is not a luxury. It is a basic human need. And for Elisa DeFord, it was something she spent her entire childhood reaching for and never quite finding. Because the place she came home to every day had walls and a roof. But it did not have the feeling. It did not have the safety. It did not have the love that should have been as natural as breathing. And what filled those walls instead was something that no child should ever have to navigate: addiction, mental illness, betrayal, and a silence so loud that it shaped every single decision Elisa would make for years to come. Today, we are going inside that home, not to judge, not to blame, but to understand, because understanding is where healing always begins. Her mother's struggle with mental illness and addiction. Let us start with her mother, because a mother is supposed to be the very first safe place a child ever knows. The first voice you hear. The first arms that hold you. The first person who makes you feel that the world is okay just by being there. But what happens when that person is fighting a war of their own? What happens when the person who is supposed to anchor you is herself, completely untethered? Elisa's mother struggled deeply with mental illness that went undiagnosed, untreated, and misunderstood. And alongside that, with addiction. Now here is something important that Bunnie Xo addresses, with real compassion in her book. She does not tell this story with hatred toward her mother. She tells it with understanding, because she understands now what she could not understand as a child: that her mother was not choosing to be absent. She was drowning, and drowning people cannot save anyone else. But understanding something does not erase the pain of it, and the pain of having a mother who was there in body, but gone in spirit, is a very specific kind of heartbreak. It is the heartbreak of almost having something, almost having the warmth, almost having the safety, almost feeling loved, and then watching it slip away again, over and over. Because that is what life with an addicted parent looks like. It is not constant darkness. It is flashes of light, followed by long stretches of shadow. It is the good days that make you hope, and the bad days that remind you not to hope too much. And for a child, that inconsistency is actually more damaging than consistent absence. Because at least with consistent absence, you learn what to expect. But with inconsistency, you are always waiting, always hoping, always being disappointed. Elisa was always waiting, always hoping, always being disappointed. And over time, that pattern became the lens through which she saw every relationship, every person who came into her life, every love, every friendship, every connection. She was always waiting for the moment it would fall apart, because in her experience, it always did. Her father's marriage to a teenager that destroyed her childhood. Now let us talk about her father. And this part requires a moment of honesty. Because what Elisa experienced, through her father's choices, was a different kind of wound. Not the wound of a parent who was struggling, but the wound of a parent who made choices, conscious, deliberate choices, that put his own needs above the well-being of his child. Her father remarried, and the person he chose to marry was a teenager, not much older than Elisa herself. Let that sink in for a moment. The man, who was supposed to be her protector, her father, her safe place, brought someone into their home who was barely older than a child herself. And the dynamic that this created was not just uncomfortable, it was destructive. It changed everything about what home felt like, because now, home was not just unstable, it was unsafe in a completely new way. A way that Elisa had no language for, no framework to understand. She just knew that something was deeply wrong, that the home was not hers anymore, that the parent, who was supposed to choose her, had chosen someone else, and in choosing someone else, he had sent her a message that a child should never receive from a parent. You are not my first priority. Your comfort, your safety, your childhood, these things matter less than what I want. That message does not go away. It does not dissolve with time if it is never addressed. It settles deep inside, and it becomes the quiet voice in the back of your mind that whispers every time someone comes close, they will choose something else over you. You are not enough to be someone's first choice. You do not deserve to be protected. Elisa carried that voice for a very long time, and it influenced every relationship, every decision, every moment where she had to choose between standing up for herself and shrinking back. She almost always shrank back, because the lesson she had been taught at home was that shrinking was safer. How the absence of real love shaped every decision she made. Now let us connect the dots, because this is where everything we have just talked about becomes deeply important. The absence of real love in childhood does not just make a child sad. It rewires them. It teaches them things about themselves and about the world that are not true, but feel completely true. And those lessons follow them everywhere. Elisa learned that love was unreliable, that people left, that the ones who were supposed to stay did not. And so, she started making decisions based on that belief. She started looking for love in places that could not actually give it to her. She started accepting less than she deserved because she did not believe she deserved more. She started staying in situations that hurt her because pain was familiar. And familiar, no matter how painful, always feels safer than the unknown. This is one of the most powerful insights in Bunnie Xo's entire memoir. She does not just tell you what happened to her. She shows you how it shaped her, how the little girl, who grew up in that home, made decisions as an adult that were directly connected to the wounds of her childhood. Not because she was weak, not because she was stupid, but because she was human, and humans always act from their deepest belief, even when those beliefs are holding them back, even when those beliefs were never true to begin with. Because here is the thing about childhood wounds: they do not announce themselves. They do not come with a label that says, "This belief came from this moment, and it is not real." They just feel like the truth. They just feel like the way things are. And until someone or something, a book, a conversation, a moment of clarity, holds up a mirror and shows you where they came from, you keep living by them. Without question, without awareness, without realizing that the story you have been telling yourself was written by pain, not by truth. The child who needed more. Before we close this chapter, I want to say something Something that Bunnie Xo communicates so beautifully in her book. None of what happened to Elisa DeFord was her fault. Not the poverty, not the addiction, not the instability, not the father's choices, not any of it. She was a child. She did not choose her circumstances. She did not choose the adults who were supposed to love her. She did not choose the lessons that her environment taught her. She was just a little girl who needed more than she received, who deserved more than she was given, who should have had a home that felt like a home, and did not. And that is not a reflection of her worth. It is a reflection of the failures of the adults around her. But here is the most important thing that this chapter teaches us. What happens to us in childhood is not the end of our story. It is the beginning. And what we do with those beginnings, how we carry them, how we examine them, how we eventually choose to move forward from them, that is where the real story lies. Elisa DeFord would carry these wounds for many years. They would take her to very dark places, places that she shares with complete honesty in the chapters ahead. But they would also, eventually, teach her something that no comfortable childhood ever could. They would teach her what she was truly made of. So now we have been inside the home that shaped Elisa DeFord. We have seen the mother who was drowning, the father whose choices stole her sense of safety, the absence of real love that quietly taught her all the wrong things about herself. And we are beginning to understand why the road ahead for this young girl was going to be so difficult, because the next chapter is where things start to spiral, where the weight of everything she had been carrying becomes too heavy to hold. And Elisa does something that so many young people in her position do. She runs away from the home that never felt like home, away from the pain that had no name, away from everything and straight into a whole new kind of chaos. So stay with me, because this story is about to get even more raw, even more honest, and even more powerful. Chapter 4: Running Away from Everything. There comes a moment in some people's lives when staying becomes more unbearable than leaving, when the place that is supposed to be your safe haven becomes the very thing you need to escape from, when the pain of remaining outweighs the fear of the unknown. And for most people, that moment is terrifying, because leaving means uncertainty. Leaving means stepping into a world with no guarantees, no map, no plan, no one waiting on the other side to tell you that everything is going to be okay. But for Elisa DeFord, staying had become impossible. The home that never felt like home, the mother who was drowning, the father whose choices had stolen her sense of safety, the chaos, the instability, the wounds that kept getting deeper with no sign of ever healing. It all reached a breaking point, and when it did, Elisa made a decision. She was leaving, not to somewhere better, not to a plan, or a person, or a place that was waiting for her, just away. Away from everything she had known, away from everything that had hurt her. And what she found, on the other side of that decision, was not safety. It was the streets of Las Vegas, and a whole new kind of survival. The moment she decided she could not stay anymore. Let us talk about that moment. The moment a young girl decides to walk away from everything. Because it is easy to hear that someone ran away and not really understand what that actually means, what it actually takes, because running away is not just a physical act. It is a decision made in a moment of absolute desperation. It is a child looking at her circumstances and concluding that she would be better off, completely alone in the world, then staying one more day, in the place she was supposed to call home. Think about how much pain a person has to be in to reach that conclusion. Think about how unsafe a home has to feel for the streets to seem like a better option. Elisa was young. She had very little, in terms of resources. She had no money saved up. She had no adult, in her corner, who would help her figure things out. She had no real plan, beyond the simple, desperate need to not be there anymore. And yet she left, because sometimes the human spirit simply reaches its limit. Sometimes the survival instinct kicks in, not to keep you in a situation, but to push you out of it. And for Elisa, that instinct was screaming, "Get out." So she did. Bunnie Xo shares this moment in her book with the kind of honesty that makes you feel like you are right there with her. You feel the desperation. You feel the fear. You feel the strange, heartbreaking combination of relief and terror that comes with walking out the door, not knowing when or if you will ever walk back through it. And what strikes you most about this moment is not the bravery. It is the loneliness, because this was not a triumphant escape. This was a child, with nowhere to go, choosing the uncertainty of the street, over the certainty of more pain at home. And that distinction is everything. Life as a young runaway on the streets of Vegas. Now let us talk about what life actually looked like for Elisa on the streets of Las Vegas, because this is where the story gets deeply real. Las Vegas, as we have already talked about, has two very different faces. There is the Vegas that the tourists see, the lights, the casinos, the excitement, the illusion that anything is possible. And then there is the Vegas that exists in the shadows, the one where people fall through the cracks, where young people with nowhere to go end up in situations that no young person should ever have to face. That was the Vegas that Elisa entered when she left home. Life on the streets is not something that can be fully understood from the outside. It is a daily, relentless, exhausting fight for the most basic things. A place to sleep, something to eat, a sense of safety that is almost impossible to find when you have no walls around you and no one watching out for you. Elisa was navigating all of this at an age when most young people are worried about school and friends and figuring out who they want to be. She did not have the luxury of those normal worries. Her worries were immediate, raw, survival level, and the streets did not offer kindness to a young girl with nothing. What they offered instead were people who recognized vulnerability and knew how to take advantage of it, because that is the reality of life without protection. You become visible to exactly the wrong people, the ones who are looking for someone with nothing to lose, someone who is desperate enough to accept whatever is offered, even when what is offered is not good, even when what is offered comes at a cost that is far too high. Bunnie Xo does not shy away from this part of her story. She talks about it with the same unflinching honesty that she brings to every page of this memoir, because she understands that these are the parts that people need to hear, not the highlights, not the victories, the raw, unglamorous, painful truth of what life on the streets actually does to a person. And what it did to Elisa was teach her, very quickly, that the world was not going to protect her, that she was entirely, completely, terrifyingly on her own, surviving alone, with no money, no plan, and no safety net. Let us talk about survival, because that is really what this chapter is about. Not running away, not the streets, but survival, the daily, brutal, never-ending work of staying alive when everything around you is working against you. Elisa had no money. She had no plan. She had no adult to call in a crisis. She had no safety net of any kind. What she had was herself, and for a long time, she was not even sure that was enough. Surviving alone, at a young age, in a city like Vegas, requires a kind of resourcefulness that is hard to describe. You learn things quickly. You learn who to trust and who to avoid. You learn which places are safe and which ones are dangerous. You learn how to read people in an instant, because reading people correctly could mean the difference between staying safe and ending up in a situation you cannot get out of. You learn to be always alert, always aware, always one step ahead of whatever might be coming. These are not skills that should be required of a young person, but they are the skills that circumstances demand, and Elisa developed them out of pure necessity. She also learned something else during this time, something that would stay with her long after she left the street. She learned that she was stronger than she thought, not in a triumphant way, not in a way that felt good, but in a quiet, stubborn, almost reluctant way, because every day that she survived was proof that she could. Every morning that she woke up, when part of her had wondered if she would, was evidence of something inside her that refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier, even when no one would have blamed her, even when the world had given her every reason to stop fighting. Something in her kept fighting, and Bunnie Xo talks about this in a way that is so honest and so important. She does not romanticize this period of her life. She does not present it as some kind of heroic adventure. She presents it as what it was: painful, dangerous, lonely, and deeply formative, because the version of Elisa that emerged from this period was different from the one who had walked out the door. Harder in some ways, more guarded, more wary, but also more aware of her own capacity to endure. And that awareness, no matter how painfully it was earned, would become one of her greatest assets in the years to come. What the streets taught her. Here is something that Bunnie Xo reflects on with real depth in her memoir. The streets taught her things that nothing else could have. Not because the streets were good, not because what she went through was okay, but because extreme circumstances teach extreme lessons. She learned that she could not rely on anyone else to save her, that waiting for someone to rescue her was a luxury she could not afford, that if she was going to get out of the situation she was in, it was going to be because of her, not because someone handed her a way out, but because she found one herself. That lesson would shape everything that came after. The podcast, the business, the empire she would eventually build. All of it was rooted in the understanding that she learned on those streets. Nobody is coming to save you. If you want better, you have to create better. With your own hands, your own mind, your own relentless, unbreakable will to survive. So now we have followed Elisa out the door and into the street. We have seen the desperation of that first decision to leave. We have understood what life without a safety net actually looks like, and we have seen the first glimpses of something powerful beginning to form inside a young girl who had every reason to fall apart, but somehow did not. But here is where the story takes an even darker turn, because surviving the streets was just the beginning. What came next pulled Elisa even deeper into a world of addiction, toxic relationships, and choices that she would carry the weight of for a very long time. And in the next chapter, Bunnie Xo shares all of it, without filters, without apology, without leaving out a single painful detail. So stay with me, because the darkest part of this story is also the most important part, and the lessons buried inside it are the ones that will stay with you long after this video ends. Chapter 5: Falling Deeper into Darkness. There is a moment in some people's stories where the road that was already difficult takes an even darker turn, where the survival strategies that were keeping someone afloat start to become the very things that pull them under, where the pain that was already heavy gets heavier, and the light that was already dim gets dimmer. For Elisa DeFord, that moment came after the streets, after the running, after the survival, when she was still young, still lost, still carrying every wound. From everything she had already been through, life handed her something new. Not relief, not rescue, not the safety she had always been reaching for. Something that looked like relief, at first. Something that felt like an escape from everything that hurt so much, but was actually the beginning of an even deeper kind of darkness. Today we are talking about that darkness, not to dwell in it, not to sensationalize it, but because Bunnie Xo chose to share it. Honestly, completely, because she knows that somewhere out there, someone is living exactly what she lived, and they need to know that even from here, even from this dark place, there is still a way out. Her descent into drug addiction and substance abuse. Let us talk about addiction, because it is one of those things that is so misunderstood by the people who have never lived it. From the outside, addiction looks like a choice. It looks like weakness. It looks like something that a person could simply stop if they just tried hard enough, or cared enough, or wanted better enough. But that is not what addiction is. Not really. Addiction is what happens when a person, in tremendous pain, finds something that takes that pain away. Even temporarily, even artificially, even in a way that creates more problems than it solves. Because when you are in enough pain, temporary relief feels like everything. It feels like the only thing that matters. It feels like survival. And for Elisa, who had been carrying so much pain for so long, the pull towards something that made it stop, even for a little while, was completely understandable. Not excusable. Not something to be proud of. But deeply, completely, humanly understandable. Bunnie Xo is unflinchingly honest about this part of her life in her memoir. She does not dress it up. She does not minimize it. She tells you exactly what it looked like, how it started, how quickly it escalated, how something that began as an escape became a cage. Because that is the cruel irony of addiction. It promises freedom from pain, and then it becomes the greatest source of pain of all. The thing you thought you were in control of takes control of you. The thing you thought was helping you survive starts threatening your survival. And by the time you realize what has happened, you are so deep inside it that the way out feels impossible to find. Elisa found herself in that place, deeper than she had ever been before, in a darkness that was no longer just about circumstances, but about chemistry, about dependency, about a body and a mind that had become so used to the substance that existing without it felt unbearable. And what made it even harder was that she was still so young, still so unequipped to deal with what she was facing, still carrying all the original wounds, the mother, the father, the streets underneath everything. The addiction did not replace the pain. It just added another layer to an already unbearable weight. The toxic relationships that dragged her further down. Now let us talk about something that almost always accompanies addiction. Toxic relationship. Because when a person is at their lowest, when they do not believe they deserve better, they attract people who confirm that belief. Not because they are unlucky, but because of what they believe about themselves. We have already talked about this, about how Elisa's childhood taught her that she was not a priority, that love was unreliable, that people would always choose something else over her. And those beliefs do not just affect how you feel about yourself, they affect who you let into your life. They affect what you accept from the people who get close to you. They affect how long you stay in situations that are hurting you, because hurting is familiar, and familiar always feels safer than the unknown. Elisa found herself in a series of relationships during this period of her life that did not lift her up. They dragged her further down. These were not relationships built on genuine love. They were relationships built on shared dysfunction, on mutual destruction, on the kind of connection that forms when two broken people find each other, and instead of healing together, they pull each other deeper into the darkness. Bunnie Xo talks about these relationships with remarkable honesty. She does not paint herself as a pure victim. She acknowledges her own role, her own choices, her own reasons for staying long after she should have left, because that is one of the most important things about her story. She does not give herself an easy pass. She looks at her own behavior, her own patterns, her own decisions with the same unflinching honesty that she applies to everything else. And what she sees, when she looks back, is a young woman who did not love herself enough to demand better, who accepted mistreatment because somewhere deep inside she believed she deserved it, or at the very least, that she had no right to expect anything different. Toxic relationships and addiction, these two things fed each other. The relationships made the pain worse. The pain drove her deeper into the addiction. The addiction made her more vulnerable to toxic people. And the cycle went around and around, getting tighter, getting darker, getting harder to see a way out of. And Elisa was caught in the middle of it, trying to survive, just trying to make it through another day. How survival became the only goal she had left. Here is something that Bunnie Xo says about this period of her life that really stays with you. She says that there came a point where she stopped thinking about the future. Not because she was lazy, not because she did not care, but because the future felt completely irrelevant. When you are in that much pain, when the addiction has taken hold, when the relationships are draining every last bit of your energy, when every day is a fight just to get through, the future stops being something you plan for. It becomes something you just hope to reach. Survival became her only goal, not success, not happiness, not building something, just surviving, just making it to tomorrow. And for a long time, that was the entire scope of Elisa's world. The next hour, the next day, just getting through. Now here is something important that Bunnie Xo wants readers to understand. This is not failure. This is not weakness. This is what happens to a human being when they have been pushed past their limit for too long. When the support systems that should have been there were not. When the love that should have been freely given was withheld. When the foundation was never solid and everything built on top of it eventually collapsed. Survival mode is not a character flaw. It is a response, a deeply human response to an overwhelming amount of pain. And the fact that Elisa was surviving at all, even in survival mode, even in the darkest depths of addiction and toxic love, was itself a kind of miracle. Because the truth is, not everyone makes it out. Not everyone who falls this deep finds the path back. Some people stay in the darkness. Some people are consumed by it. And the fact that Elisa was not, the fact that something in her kept holding on, even when holding on made no logical sense, says everything about the person she was always meant to become. What this chapter teaches us. Before we close this chapter, I want to take a moment, because this part of Bunnie Xo's story carries a lesson that goes far beyond her individual experience. It carries a lesson for anyone who has ever fallen, for anyone who has ever found themselves in a place they never imagined they would be, for anyone who has ever looked at their life and barely recognized the person staring back at them. The lesson is this: falling is not the end. How deep you fall does not determine how high you can rise. The darkness that you are in right now is not your permanent address. It is a chapter. A painful, difficult, deeply challenging chapter. But a chapter, nonetheless. And chapters end. New ones begin. Elisa DeFord would eventually find her way out of this darkness. Not quickly. Not easily. Not without more pain, more struggle, more moments of wondering if she would ever find the surface again. But she would find it. And when she did, everything that she had been through, every wound, every mistake, every dark night, every moment of survival would become the foundation of something extraordinary. So today we went deep. We talked about addiction and what it really is, not a choice but a response to unbearable pain. We talked about toxic relationships and how they form when a person does not believe they deserve better. And we talked about survival mode, that place where the future disappears and just getting through the day becomes the entire goal. Elisa DeFord was in that place, completely, and things were about to get even harder, because in the next chapter we are going to talk about the relationships that did the most damage, the men who came into her life during her most vulnerable moments, the abuse she endured, the manipulation she survived, and the moment she finally began to see what was happening and why she had allowed it. So stay with me, because this next chapter is one of the most raw, most honest, and most important parts of Bunnie Xo's entire story. And the lessons inside it are ones that nobody should have to learn the hard way, but that everyone deserves to hear. Chapter 6: The Men Who Broke Her. I want you to think about something. Have you ever watched someone stay in a situation that was clearly hurting them? Have you ever looked at someone you cared about and wondered why they would not just leave, why they kept going back, why they kept accepting treatment that nobody deserved, why they kept believing that things would get better even when every piece of evidence said otherwise? And maybe in that moment you felt frustrated. Maybe you thought, if that were me, I would never allow that. But here is what Bunnie Xo wants you to understand, before we go any further. Nobody grows up dreaming of being in an abusive relationship. Nobody chooses pain because they enjoy it. Nobody stays because they are weak. People stay because of what they believe about themselves, because of what they were taught to expect from love, because of patterns so deeply ingrained that they feel like just the way things are. And for Elisa DeFord, those patterns, planted in childhood, watered by trauma, led her into a series of relationships that left marks so deep they changed the shape of who she was. Today we talk about those relationships, not to assign blame, not to dwell in the pain, but because Bunnie Xo chose to share them. Completely, honestly, because she knows that millions of people are living inside the exact same story. And they need to know that there is a way out, a series of abusive relationships that left deep scars. Let us start with something that is really important to understand. Abusive relationships rarely start with abuse. They start with something that feels like the opposite. They start with attention, with intensity, with someone who makes you feel like you are the most important person in the world, who says all the right things, who shows up in all the right ways, who fills, in a very targeted way, all the empty spaces inside of you. And for someone like Elisa, who had grown up never feeling like enough, never feeling chosen, never feeling truly loved, that kind of attention felt like water in a desert. It felt like finally, someone who sees me. Finally, someone who wants me. Finally, someone who is choosing me first. And so she trusted. She opened up. She let people in who had not earned that access, because she did not yet know that real love does not feel like desperation. Real love does not make you feel like you have to earn it every single day. Real love does not slowly, systematically, chip away at your sense of self. But Elisa did not know that yet. And so the relationships began, one after another, each one carrying its own version of the same core wound. The man who started with sweetness and ended with control. The man who made her feel special until she disagreed with him. The man who said he loved her with one breath and destroyed her confidence with the next. Bunnie Xo shares these stories in her memoir with a level of detail that is both painful and powerful. She does not generalize. She does not protect the people who hurt her. She tells you exactly what happened, because she believes that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always more valuable than a comfortable silence. And the truth is that these relationships left scars, deep ones, scars that took years to understand, scars that showed up in her behavior, her choices, her relationship with herself long after the relationships had ended. Because that is the thing about abuse. It does not stay in the past. It follows you. It lives inside of you. It changes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you move through the world until you do the work of understanding it and healing from it. Domestic violence, manipulation, and emotional destruction. Now let us talk about what these relationships actually looked like, because abuse is not always what people picture. It is not always loud. It is not always visible. Sometimes, the most damaging abuse leaves no physical marks at all. Manipulation is one of the most powerful forms of abuse, because it does not attack your body. It attacks your mind. It makes you question your own reality. It makes you feel like you are the problem, like your feelings are too big, like your needs are unreasonable, like the person hurting you is actually the victim, and you, the one being hurt, are somehow the one causing all the damage. This is called gaslighting, and Elisa experienced it in ways that made her doubt everything she knew about herself. She would feel hurt by something that was said or done, and somehow, by the end of the conversation, she would be the one apologizing. She would raise a concern, and somehow, by the end, she would feel foolish for raising it. She would try to leave, and somehow, by the end, she would believe that she was lucky anyone wanted her at all. That is manipulation. That is the slow, invisible, deeply insidious process of making someone believe that they are less so that they will accept less. And alongside the manipulation, there was also physical violence. Bunnie Xo does not shy away from this in her book. She talks about it directly, because she knows that there are people reading who have experienced exactly this and who need to hear someone else say it out loud. Someone else say, "This happened to me. It was not okay. I did not deserve it. And neither do you." Domestic violence leaves marks that go far beyond the physical. It leaves a person afraid of their own home, afraid of the person who is supposed to love them, walking on eggshells in the one place they should feel safest. And over time, it chips away at everything: your confidence, your sense of self, your ability to trust your own judgment, your belief that you are capable of making good decisions. All of it, slowly, quietly, deliberately, taken from you by someone who claimed to love you. Elisa lost a lot in these relationships, things that took years to rebuild. But she did rebuild them. And that is the most important part of this story. Why she kept going back. Now let us talk about something that requires real honesty. Because one of the hardest questions about abusive relationships is always the same. Why do people go back? Why, after leaving, do they return? Why, when they know what they are walking back into, do they walk back anyway? The answer is never simple, and Bunnie Xo understands that. She addresses it in her book with such compassion and clarity. She talks about the cycle of abuse, how after the violence, or the manipulation, there is almost always a period of intense love, of apology, of the person going back to being the version that made you fall for them in the first place. Flowers, tears, promises. I will change. I am sorry. You know I love you. It will never happen again. And for someone who had spent her whole life hungry for love, those moments were impossibly hard to walk away from. Because in those moments, she could see the person she had fallen in love with, the one who made her feel chosen, the one who filled all those empty spaces, and the hope that this version of them was the real one. That hope was stronger than the fear of what came after. But there was something else underneath the hope, something that Bunnie Xo is deeply honest about. She went back because she did not believe she deserved better. She went back because somewhere deep inside she had been taught that this was what love looked like, that pain and love existed together, that you could not have one without the other, that if someone hurt you, it was because they cared. These were not conscious thoughts, they were belief, deeply buried, quietly operating, beliefs installed in childhood, reinforced by every difficult experience she had ever had. And until those beliefs were brought to the surface, examined, and challenged, they would keep driving her decisions, without her even realizing it. What finally made her see the truth? So what changed? What was the moment that something shifted inside of Elisa? What made her finally see clearly what had been happening to her? Bunnie Xo talks about this in her memoir as a gradual awakening, not one single dramatic moment, but a slow, painful, undeniable accumulation of truth. The truth that she was disappearing, that the person she had been before all of this was barely recognizable anymore, that she had been so focused on surviving the relationships that she had lost almost all connection with herself, with her own wants, her own needs, her own identity. And there was a moment when she looked at herself, really looked, and what she saw frightened her. Not because she was broken, but because she was almost gone, and something inside her rose up at that realization. Something quiet but fierce. Something that said, "This is not who you are. This is not all there is for you. You were not put on this earth to be someone's punching bag. You deserve to exist without being afraid. You deserve to be loved without being destroyed." That voice was small at first, but it was there, and Elisa, for the first time, in a very long time, chose to listen to it. What this chapter teaches us. Before we close, I want to say something directly to anyone who is hearing this and recognizing their own story. If you are in a relationship that is hurting you, please hear this. Going back does not make you weak. Staying does not make you stupid. Loving someone who hurts you does not make you broken. It makes you human, with wounds that have not yet been understood, with beliefs about yourself that have not yet been challenged. But those wounds can heal, those beliefs can change, and the life on the other side of that healing is more beautiful than anything you can currently imagine. Bunnie Xo is proof of that, and her story is not finished yet. So today, we went into one of the most painful parts of Elisa DeFord's story. We talked about the relationships that left the deepest scars, the manipulation, the violence, the slow destruction of a person's sense of self. And we talked about why she stayed, not out of weakness, but out of deeply buried beliefs about what she deserved, and the moment when something inside her finally said enough. But here is where the story reaches its absolute lowest point, because before the turning point, there is always the darkest night. And in the next chapter, we are going to talk about exactly that. The night when everything fell apart completely, when Elisa hit rock bottom, so hard that she did not know if she would ever get back up. So stay with me, because this next chapter is the most important one yet, and what comes after it is nothing short of extraordinary. Chapter 7, Hitting Rock Bottom. There is a place that some people reach that is hard to describe to those who have never been there, a place where everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, where every support has been removed, where every coping mechanism has stopped working, where the pain has become so consuming, so total, so overwhelming that the idea of continuing feels impossible. Most people hear the phrase rock bottom and they think they understand it, but rock bottom is not just a bad day. It is not just a difficult season. Rock bottom is the place where a person looks at their life and cannot find a single reason to keep going, where hope does not just feel distant. It feels completely, permanently gone. Elisa DeFord reached that place, and Bunnie Xo, in her memoir, shares exactly what that looked like, with the kind of honesty that most people would never have the courage to put on a page, because she knows that somewhere out there, someone is in that place right now. Someone who needs to hear that even from rock bottom, there is still a way up, even when it does not feel like it, even when nothing inside of you believes it, even then. Her darkest moments. Let us talk about what rock bottom actually looked like for Elisa, because it did not happen in one single moment. It was a series of moments, each one darker than the last, each one stripping away a little more of whatever was left. The addiction had reached a point where it was no longer just a coping mechanism. It had become the center of everything, the thing that her entire day revolved around, the thing that made every other decision irrelevant, because when you are deep enough in addiction, nothing else exists. Not the future, not the people who might love you, not the person you might have been. just the next moment of relief from the pain. And Elisa was deep enough. She experienced overdoses, moments where her body reached its absolute limit, moments that should have ended everything, moments that reminded her in the most brutal, terrifying way possible just how close to the edge she was living. And yet, even after those moments, even with that reminder sitting heavy in her chest, the pull back toward the darkness was still stronger than the pull toward the light. Because that is the nature of addiction, combined with deep emotional pain. Logic does not reach it. Fear does not fix it. Even the very real, very visceral experience of almost dying is not always enough to break the cycle, because the pain, underneath everything, is still there, waiting. And without real healing, without real support, the only relief still seems to come from the same place. Bunnie Xo shares all of this in her memoir with a rawness that is almost uncomfortable to read. But that discomfort is intentional, because she wants you to feel the weight of it. She wants you to understand that this was not a dramatic storyline. This was her real life, her real pain, her real fight for survival. The night she thought she would not survive. Now let us talk about the darkest night, the one that Bunnie Xo shares in her memoir as the moment when everything reached its absolute lowest point. There are nights in some people's lives that exist in a category of their own, nights that are so dark, so hopeless, so completely devoid of any light that the person living through them genuinely does not know if they will see the morning. Elisa had that night, a night when the combination of everything she had been through, the childhood, the streets, the addiction, the abuse, the loss, the relentless, never-ending pain, all of it came crashing down at once. A night when the weight became too much to carry, when the idea of continuing, of facing another day, of another morning, waking up, still inside this life, felt impossible. She did not want to die, because she did not value her life. She wanted the pain to stop, and in that moment, death seemed like the only way it ever would. That is the truth about suicidal thoughts that most people do not understand. It is almost never really about wanting to die. It is about wanting the pain to end, about being so exhausted, so depleted, so completely out of any other option that the mind begins to look for an exit. Any exit. And Elisa, on that night, was looking for an exit. Bunnie Xo talks about this in her memoir with a level of vulnerability that is extraordinary. She does not romanticize it. She does not make it into something it was not. She simply tells you what it was like to be in that place, to feel that hopeless, to look at your life and see nothing worth staying for. And she tells you because she wants you to know she has been there, all the way there, and she made it out. What kept her alive? So what happened? What kept Elisa DeFord alive on that darkest night? What was the thing that pulled her back from the edge? Bunnie Xo is honest about the fact that it was not one dramatic moment. It was not a sudden realization that life was beautiful. It was not a vision, or a sign, or a perfectly timed phone call from someone who knew. It was something much quieter than that, much smaller. It was a flicker, a tiny, stubborn, almost imperceptible flicker of something that refused to be completely extinguished. Some people call it the will to live. Some people call it instinct. Some people, who have been in that place, describe it as a voice. Small, almost inaudible, but present. A voice that said, "Not yet. Not like this. There has to be something else." For Elisa, that voice had been there through every hard thing she had ever faced, through the chaos of childhood, through the streets, through the addiction, through the abuse. It had always been there, quiet, persistent, refusing to completely disappear. And on that darkest night it was still there, just barely, but enough. Enough to get through the night, enough to see the morning, enough to take one more breath, when every part of her was telling her not to. Bunnie Xo also talks about something else that kept her going, a deep, unresolved feeling that her story was not finished yet, that there was something she had not yet done, something she had not yet become, that the version of herself she could sometimes glimpse in rare, quiet moments was still possible, that the life she had always, somewhere deep down, believed she deserved was still available. She did not have proof of that. She did not have evidence. She did not have a plan, or a roadmap, or a single concrete reason to believe it. She just had the feeling, and she chose to hold on to it. That choice, that small, quiet, desperate choice, changed everything. What this moment teaches us. I want to stop here, for a moment, because this part of Bunnie Xo's story carries something that goes beyond her individual experience. It carries a message for every person who has ever been in a dark place, for everyone who has ever had a night that felt like it would never end, for everyone who has ever wondered if the pain would ever stop. The message is this: rock bottom is not the end. It feels like the end. It looks like the end. Every single part of you may believe that it is the end, but it is not. Rock bottom is actually, and this is something that Bunnie Xo believes deeply, the place where the real transformation begins. Because when you have lost everything, when there is nothing left to protect, when the masks and the coping mechanisms and the survival strategies have all stopped working, something else becomes possible. Something real, something honest, a kind of clarity that only comes when everything else has been stripped away. And that clarity, painful, raw, and completely unfiltered, is actually the beginning of everything. It is the seed of the life that is waiting on the other side. Elisa DeFord survived her rock bottom, and what she built from that place is nothing short of extraordinary. So today, we went to the darkest place in Bunnie Xo's story. We talked about the overdoses, the despair, the night she thought she would not survive, and we talked about the tiny, stubborn, undefeatable flicker that kept her alive when nothing else could. And now, something is about to change, because in the next chapter we reach the turning point, the moment when Elisa DeFord looks at her life and makes a decision, not to be saved, not to wait for someone to rescue her, but to save herself, to choose herself, for the very first time. And that decision changes absolutely everything. So stay with me, because the darkest chapter is behind us now, and what comes next is the part of this story that will make everything we have just been through completely worth it. Chapter 8: Choosing Herself for the First Time. There is a moment that changes everything. Not a loud moment, not a dramatic one, not the kind of moment that comes with a soundtrack and a slow-motion replay. Just a quiet, ordinary, completely unremarkable moment where something shifts inside a person, where they look at their life, at everything they have been through, at every road they have traveled, every wound they have carried, every version of themselves they have slowly lost along the way, and they make a decision. Not a perfect decision, not a confident one, not one backed by a solid plan or a clear path forward. Just a decision. A small, fierce, life-changing decision. That says enough. Enough surviving. Enough letting the pain make all the choices. Enough waiting for something outside of me to fix what is broken inside. Enough being a passenger in my own life. For Elisa DeFord, that moment came. After everything. After the childhood, the streets, the addiction, the abuse, the darkest nights. After all of it, she made a decision to choose herself for the very first time. And that decision did not fix everything overnight. It did not erase the pain, or the scars, or the years of damage. But it started something. Something real. Something unstoppable. Something that would eventually carry her from the darkest place she had ever been to a life she had once believed was impossible for someone like her. Today we talk about that decision, and everything it set in motion. The decision to stop being a victim of her circumstances. Let us start with something that requires real honesty, because the word victim is a complicated one, and Bunnie Xo handles it, in her memoir, with remarkable care. She is very clear about one thing. What happened to Elisa was real. The childhood, the neglect, the abuse, the addiction, none of it was her fault. She was genuinely a victim of circumstances that she did not choose, of people who failed her, of a world that did not protect her the way it should have. And that truth deserves to be acknowledged fully, without minimizing, without the kind of toxic positivity that tells people, just choose happiness and everything will be fine. Because that is not what this chapter is about. But here is what Bunnie Xo also says, with equal honesty. There comes a point, after you have been through what you have been through, where you face a choice. Not a choice about what happened to you. You did not get to choose that. But a choice about what happens next. About whether the story of what was done to you becomes the permanent story of who you are. About whether the pain gets to write every remaining chapter of your life, or whether you pick up the pen and start writing something different. Elisa reached that crossroads, and for the first time she chose to pick up the pen. Not because she was suddenly strong. Not because the pain had gone away. Not because she had figured everything out. But because she had seen what the alternative looked like. She had lived the alternative. She had gone as far down as a person can go. And she had seen, with complete clarity, that staying in victim mode was not actually keeping her safe. It was keeping her stuck. And stuck, she realized, was its own kind of dying. Slow. Invisible. But just as final. So she chose differently. She chose to stop, letting what happened to her be the reason she could not move forward. She chose to stop, using her pain as an excuse. Not because the pain was not real, but because she was tired of letting it run the show. And that choice, that single, quiet, deeply personal choice was the first real act of self-love she had ever given herself. How she began to reclaim her power on her own terms. Now let us talk about what reclaiming power actually looks like, because it is not what most people picture. It is not a sudden transformation. It is not a makeover, or a move to a new city, or a single conversation that changes everything. Reclaiming your power is quiet. It is internal. It is made up of hundreds of small moments where you choose yourself instead of the old pattern, where you hear the old voice and respond differently, where you face the familiar pull toward what is comfortable, even when comfortable means harmful, and you choose something else. For Elisa, reclaiming her power started with the most basic things. It started with honesty, looking at her life without the filters she had been using to make it bearable, seeing it as it actually was, not as she wished it was, Not as she had convinced herself it needed to be. Just as it was. And that kind of honesty is harder than it sounds. Because when you have been surviving, by not looking too closely, looking closely feels dangerous. It feels like it might break you. But Bunnie Xo talks about something, in her memoir, that is so important. She says, the looking does not break you. It is the not looking that has been breaking you all along. And so Elisa looked. She looked at the addiction, and admitted what it was doing to her. She looked at the relationships, and admitted what they were costing her. She looked at the beliefs she had been carrying about herself and for the first time started to question them. Are these actually true? Are these actually mine? Or are these the stories that pain wrote about me that I have been believing without ever questioning? And slowly, painfully, imperfectly she started to separate who she actually was from what she had been through. That separation is everything, because as long as those two things are fused together, as long as you believe that what happened to you is who you are, you cannot move. But the moment you see that they are different, that you are not your trauma, you are not your mistakes, you are not the worst things that were ever done to you, something opens up. A space, a possibility, a small, but real, sense that there might be another way. The moment she realized redemption was entirely up to her. Now here is the most important realization of this entire chapter. The one that Bunnie Xo says changed the trajectory of her entire life. Redemption was entirely up to her, not up to the people who had hurt her, not up to circumstance, not up to luck, or timing, or someone coming along to rescue her. Up to her. Only her. And that realization came with two very different feelings at the same time. The first feeling was terrifying, because if redemption was entirely up to her, then there was no one else to wait for. No hero coming to save the day. No perfect set of circumstances that would finally make things easier. Just her. With everything she had, and everything she lacked, responsible for her own way forward. That is a heavy thing to realize, especially for someone who had spent so much of her life hoping that something outside of herself would finally fix things. But the second feeling was something else entirely. It was power, because if redemption was entirely up to her, then it was also entirely possible. Nobody could take it from her. Nobody could decide that she did not deserve it. Nobody could withhold it from her. It was hers, completely, available whenever she decided to reach for it. And that realization changed everything. Bunnie Xo talks about this in her memoir as the moment the shift truly began. Not the moment everything got better, but the moment she understood that better was possible, that she was not beyond redemption, that no one is beyond redemption, not even someone who had been through everything she had been through, not even someone who had made every mistake she had made, not even someone who had hurt people, been hurt by people, lost themselves completely, and wondered if there was anything left worth saving. There was. There always was. And she was the only one who could save it. What this means for you. Before we close this chapter, I want to speak directly to you. Because this moment, in Bunnie Xo's story, is not just her moment. It is a universal one. It is the moment that is available to every single person, no matter where they are, no matter what they have been through, no matter how many times they have fallen. The moment where you decide that what happened to you does not get to determine where you are going, where you decide that the labels other people put on you do not define you. where you decide that the mistakes you have made, the things you have lost, the version of yourself you can barely recognize are not the final word on who you are, because you get to write the final word. That is what Bunnie Xo wants you to take from this chapter. Not inspiration, not motivation, a reminder that you have always had more power over your own story than anyone or anything has ever led you to believe. And the moment you decide to use that power is the moment everything starts to change. So today, we witnessed something incredibly powerful. We watched a woman who had every reason to stay down decide to get up. Not perfectly, not confidently, but decisively. We talked about the difference between being a victim of your circumstances and allowing those circumstances to permanently define you. We talked about what reclaiming power really looks like, not dramatic, not overnight, but quiet, consistent, and deeply personal. And we talked about the most important realization of this entire journey, that redemption is not something that is given to you. It is something you choose. And Elisa DeFord chose it. Now comes the real work, because in the next chapter, we are going to talk about what happens after the decision, the hard, daily, unglamorous work of actually breaking the cycles, of identifying the patterns that have been running your life and doing the deeply uncomfortable work of changing them. So stay with me, because the turning point has arrived, and the story from here is one that will remind you that no matter where you start, where you finish, is always entirely up to you. Chapter 9: Breaking the Cycles. I want you to think about something. Have you ever noticed a pattern in your life? Something that keeps showing up, no matter how hard you try to move past it? The same kind of relationship with a different face, the same argument in a different setting, the same feeling of being stuck, even when everything around you has changed. The same outcome, no matter how differently you try to approach things. If you have ever experienced that, if you have ever looked at your life and thought, why does this keep happening to me? Then this chapter is going to speak directly to something deep inside of you. Because cycles are one of the most powerful and most misunderstood forces in a human life. They are not accidents. They are not bad luck. They are not proof that you are broken or hopeless or beyond change. They are patterns, learned patterns, deeply ingrained, consistently reinforced, completely automatic patterns that run in the background of everything you do, until you decide to look at them, until you decide to name them, until you decide to do the hardest thing a person can do: change them. Elisa DeFord reached that decision after the rock bottom, after the choice to stop being a victim, after the realization that redemption was entirely up to her. The next step was the most difficult one: breaking the cycles. And today, Bunnie Xo is going to show us exactly what that looked like. Identifying the toxic patterns she had been repeating her whole life. Let us start at the very beginning of this process, because before you can break a cycle, you have to see it clearly, honestly, without flinching. And that is harder than it sounds, because cycles are invisible when you are inside them. They feel like just the way things are. They feel like your personality, your destiny, your natural way of moving through the world. They do not feel like patterns that were learned. They feel like truths that were born. And that distinction is everything. For Elisa, the process of identifying her patterns started with something that Bunnie Xo describes in her memoir with great honesty. She started looking at the common denominators In every painful situation she had ever been in, what was the one thing that was always present? In every toxic relationship she had ever stayed in too long, what was the belief that kept her there? In every moment where she had self-sabotaged, chosen destruction over growth, stayed when she should have left, or left when she should have stayed, what was the story she was telling herself? And when she started asking those questions, patterns began to emerge. Pattern number 1. She consistently chose people who confirmed her deepest belief about herself, the belief that she was not worthy of consistent, reliable, genuine love. And so, she found people who were inconsistent, unreliable, incapable of the kind of love she actually needed. Not because she was unlucky, but because familiarity feels like comfort, and inconsistent love was what she had always known. Pattern number 2. She used substances and chaos as a way of not feeling, of not sitting with the pain, of not having to face the quiet, honest truth of her own inner world, because the inner world felt too painful to inhabit, and so she stayed outside of it as much as possible, filling every moment with noise, with substances, with anything that kept the silence at bay. Pattern number 3. She accepted blame for things that were not her fault. She had been trained from a very young age to believe that when things went wrong, she was the problem. And so, every time something went wrong, even when it was clearly not her doing, she took it on, added it to the weight she was already carrying, used it as more evidence that she was fundamentally broken. These patterns had been running for years, quietly, consistently, shaping every major decision she had ever made, and seeing them clearly for the first time was both deeply painful and deeply liberating. Painful because it meant acknowledging how much of her own suffering she had unknowingly participated in, and liberating because patterns, unlike the past, can be changed. The hard work of unlearning everything she had been taught. Now let us talk about the part that nobody warns you about, the part that comes after the realization, because realizing that you have patterns is actually the easy part. Understanding where they came from is the next step. But unlearning them? Actually changing the deeply ingrained, completely automatic, ran on autopilot for years behaviors? That is where the real work begins. And it is hard. Bunnie Xo is very honest about this in her memoir. She does not present her transformation as a clean, linear, step-by-step process. She presents it as what it actually was: messy, non-linear, full of setbacks, full of moments where the old patterns tried to pull her back, where the familiar, even when harmful, felt so much more comfortable than the new. Because here is the thing about unlearning: your brain does not let go of old patterns easily. It has spent years building those neural pathways, years reinforcing those responses, years making those patterns feel completely natural, and when you try to replace them with something new, something healthier, something that actually serves you, your brain resists. It sends alarm signals. It tells you that the new way is dangerous, that the old way is safer, that change is a threat. And in those moments, the moments where the old pattern is screaming, and the new one is barely a whisper, you have to make a choice. Every single time. To choose the whisper over the scream. For Elisa, unlearning started with something that Bunnie Xo talks about as one of the most difficult things she ever did. She started being honest with herself, not just about the patterns, but about why the patterns existed, about the beliefs underneath them, about the childhood wounds that had never been acknowledged, never been grieved, never been properly processed. Because you cannot unlearn a behavior without understanding what it was protecting you from. Every toxic pattern exists for a reason. It started as a survival mechanism, a way of getting through something that was too big to face directly. And until you understand what it was surviving and find a healthier way to address that same underlying need, the pattern will keep coming back. In different forms, with different people, in different situations, but fundamentally the same. Elisa had to go back into the pain she had spent her whole life running from and actually sit with it, feel it, understand it, give it the acknowledgement it had always needed. And that process was not quick. It was not neat. It was not comfortable. But it was necessary. And it was the foundation of everything that came after. How she started building herself back up from absolute zero. Now here is the part that I think is the most powerful of this entire chapter. Because this is where Bunnie Xo's story stops being just about destruction and starts being about construction. About building. About the quiet, daily, brick-by-brick process of creating something new from the rubble of everything that had fallen apart. Starting from absolute zero is not a metaphor in Elisa's case. It was literal. She did not have money. She did not have a support system. She did not have a career, or a platform, or a clear direction. She did not have confidence, or a strong sense of identity, or a well-developed understanding of her own worth. She had herself. That was it. And for a long time, she was not even sure that was enough. But she started anyway. With small things. With the most basic acts of choosing differently. One day, choosing not to go back to something that she knew would hurt her. One day, saying no to something that the old Elisa would have said yes to. One day, treating herself with a fraction of the kindness she had always given to everyone else. These were not big moves. They were tiny ones, almost invisible, but they were real, and they were hers, and each one added something to a foundation that was slowly, quietly, being built. Bunnie Xo talks about the importance of small wins in this process, because when you are building from zero, big wins are not available yet. The only thing available is the next small choice, the next tiny step in the right direction, and the discipline of honoring those small steps, of not dismissing them, because they feel insignificant, is what eventually creates something significant. She also talks about something that surprised her in this process, as she started to rebuild, as she started to make different choices, develop different habits, treat herself differently. Something unexpected happened. She started to like herself. Not love. Not yet. But like. A small, tentative, fragile like that was completely new. That had not existed at any previous point in her life. And that feeling, as small as it was revolutionary. Because for a person who had spent her whole life believing she was unworthy, the experience of actually liking herself even a little was transformative. It changed the way she made decisions. It changed who she allowed into her life. It changed what she was willing to accept. And it changed the way she saw her own future, not as something to be survived, but as something to be built. The truth about breaking cycles. Before we close this chapter, I want to share something that Bunnie Xo communicates so powerfully in her memoir. Breaking cycles is not about perfection. It is not about never falling back into old patterns. It is not about having a clean record of always making the right choice. Breaking cycles is about awareness, about catching yourself sooner each time, about choosing differently more often than you used to, about being a little kinder to yourself when you slip and a little quicker to get back on track. It is progress, not perfection, and progress, no matter how small, no matter how slow, no matter how many detours it takes along the way, is always, always worth celebrating. Because every day that you choose differently from the day before, you are rewriting something. Not just your behavior, your story, your identity, the way you understand yourself, and eventually, the new patterns become as natural as the old ones once were. The new choices become the automatic ones. The new version of yourself becomes the one you recognize in the mirror, and the person who was once completely lost finds their way home to themselves. So today, we talked about one of the most important and most undervalued parts of any real transformation. We talked about seeing the patterns that have been quietly running your life and having the courage to name them. We talked about the hard, unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable work of unlearning, of going back into the pain, understanding it, and finding your way through it. And we talked about the quiet, daily, one small step at a time process of building yourself back up from absolute zero. Elisa DeFord was doing that work, slowly, imperfectly, but consistently, and the universe was about to reward that consistency in a way she never expected. Because in the next chapter, we are going to talk about something that arrived in the middle of all this rebuilding, something that she did not plan for, something that surprised her completely, a connection that would change everything. The story of how Elisa DeFord met the man who would become her greatest partner in healing, Jason DeFord. The world knows him as Jelly Roll, and their story is unlike anything you have ever heard. So stay with me, because the next chapter is one of the most beautiful ones yet. Chapter 10, Finding Jelly Roll. Sometimes, life surprises you, not with a grand gesture, not with a perfectly timed, perfectly packaged, perfectly wrapped moment that announces itself as something important. Sometimes, the most significant thing that ever happens to you arrives quietly, without warning, without fanfare, without any sign that this, right here, this ordinary moment is going to be the one that changes everything. For Elisa DeFord, that moment came in the form of a person who was also broken, also healing, also carrying more weight than most people would ever understand, a person who had also grown up hard, also made mistakes, also lived in the kind of places and through the kind of things that most people only read about. His name was Jason DeFord, and the world knows him as Jelly Roll. Now, before we go any further, I want to be very clear about something. This chapter is not a fairy tale. It is not a story about being rescued. It is not about a man coming along and fixing everything that was broken. Because Bunnie Xo is very intentional about this in her memoir. She does not present Jason as her savior. She presents him as her partner, her equal, someone who was on his own journey of healing and growth and who happened to be traveling in the same direction. And when two people on the same journey find each other and decide to walk together, something powerful becomes possible. Not rescue, something better than rescue, real connection. And that is what this chapter is about. Meeting Jason DeFord at a concert and feeling something shift. Let us talk about the beginning. because every great story has one. And this one started the way so many real, unexpected, life-changing things start. Simply, Elisa met Jason at a concert. Not in a setting designed for romance. Not in a moment constructed for maximum effect. Just two people in the same place, at the same time. And something in that meeting felt different. Bunnie Xo talks about this in her memoir with an honesty that makes it feel completely real. She does not describe it as love at first sight. She does not wrap it in the language of movie romance. She describes it as a feeling, a shift, something that she noticed in the way he spoke to her, the way he looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her, like he actually saw her, not the performance, not the persona, not the carefully constructed version of herself that she had learned to present to the world, the real her. And for someone who had spent most of her life feeling invisible or visible only to the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, being truly seen by someone felt extraordinary. It felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, because when you have been hurt as many times as Elisa had been hurt, something that feels good also feels dangerous. Your instinct is not to lean into it. Your instinct is to brace yourself for when it falls apart. To wait for the moment when the real person reveals himself. To not trust what your heart is telling you because your heart has led you wrong so many times before. And Elisa felt all of that. The pull toward Jason. And the fear of that pull. At the same time. But something else was also present in that initial meeting. A sense of recognition. Not just attraction. Recognition. The feeling that this person understood something about the world, about the kind of world she had come from that most people simply did not. Because Jason had come from similar places. He knew what it was to struggle. He knew what it was to make choices you were not proud of. He knew what it was to be written off by a world that had already decided what you were worth. And that shared understanding created a kind of safety between them right from the beginning. A safety that Elisa had never quite experienced with anyone before. The early days of their relationship and the challenges they faced. Now let us be honest about something. Two broken people coming together does not automatically create something healthy. It can actually create something even more complicated, even more chaotic, even more painful. Because when two people with unhealed wounds come together, those wounds interact. They bump into each other. They trigger each other. They bring out not just the best in each other, but also, sometimes, the worst. And the early days of Elisa and Jason's relationship were not without difficulty. Bunnie Xo is honest about this in her memoir. She does not skip over the hard parts. She does not present their relationship as effortless. Because it was not effortless. They were both carrying enormous amounts of baggage, both dealing with their own demons, both navigating their own journeys of healing and growth, and doing that while also trying to build something together was not simple. There were moments of real tension, of old patterns trying to reassert themselves, of fear stepping in and trying to sabotage something that was good because good felt unfamiliar. Because that is what happens when you are not used to something healthy. It feels suspicious. It feels like it cannot last. It feels like you are waiting for the other shoe to drop. And sometimes, that waiting, that constant low-level expectation of disaster can actually create the very thing you are afraid of. Both Elisa and Jason had to navigate that, had to recognize, when they were responding to the past instead of the present, had to choose again and again to stay in the room instead of running, to have the difficult conversation instead of shutting down, to trust instead of protecting. And that choosing was not easy. But it was worth it, because every time they chose it, every time they stayed, instead of running, talked instead of shutting down, trusted instead of protecting, they built something. A little more safety, a little more understanding, a little more of the foundation that their relationship needed to survive. How two broken people found healing in each other. Now here is the most beautiful part of this chapter, and it is something that Bunnie Xo talks about with such depth and such love in her memoir, the way that she and Jason found healing in each other, not because they fixed each other, not because one saved the other, but because they created a space between them where healing became possible for both of them. Think about what that actually means. When you are with someone who accepts you fully, completely, without asking you to be different, something relaxes inside of you. Something that has been braced for a very long time lets go a little, and in that letting go, in that small, tender space of being accepted as you are, healing can begin. Not because the other person heals you, but because their acceptance creates the safety that you need to begin healing yourself. Jason did that for Elisa, and Elisa did that for Jason. They were not each other's therapists. They were not each other's projects. They were each other's witnesses. People who said, "I see you. All of you. The broken parts and the beautiful parts. The past and the present. The mistakes and the growth. I see all of it. And I am not going anywhere." And that, for two people who had spent most of their lives feeling unseen, feeling unworthy, feeling like they had to hide the most authentic parts of themselves to be accepted, was profoundly healing. Bunnie Xo also talks about something in her memoir that I find incredibly powerful. She talks about how their relationship held up a mirror to both of them. Because when you are truly close to someone, when the masks come down, and the real versions of you are in the room together, you see things about yourself that you cannot see alone. Patterns that you could ignore when you were by yourself become visible in the context of a real relationship. And instead of using those mirrors to judge each other, they use them to understand each other, to understand themselves, to do the work that both of them had been needing to do for a very long time. And that willingness to look honestly at themselves and each other and to do the work together is what made their relationship not just a love story, but a healing story, a growth story, a story about what becomes possible when two people choose each other with full awareness, not despite their brokenness, but including it. What their relationship teaches us. Before we close this chapter, I want to share something that Bunnie Xo communicates so beautifully throughout her memoir. She wants people to know that love after trauma is possible. Real, healthy, genuine love after everything you have been through is possible. Not the love that was born from desperation. Not the love that was really just familiarity, dressed up as connection. Real love. The kind that sees you fully. The kind that stays through the difficult moments. The kind that challenges you to grow, not by making you feel small, but by believing in your capacity to be more. And she also wants people to know something else, that finding that kind of love starts with something that has nothing to do with another person. It starts with you, with the work you do on yourself, with the patterns you break, with the wounds you tend to, with the version of yourself you are building quietly, daily, brick by brick, because the healthier you become, the more clearly you can see what is healthy in others. The more you love yourself, the more naturally you find people who love you back in kind. The more you know your worth, the less you settle for things that do not honor it. Elisa found Jason at a point where she was already doing the work, already choosing herself, already in the process of breaking the cycles, and it is not a coincidence that a genuinely good person showed up at that moment. That is not luck. That is alignment. That is what happens when you start showing up for yourself. The right people start showing up for you. So today, we witnessed something genuinely beautiful. We talked about the moment Elisa DeFord met Jason DeFord and felt something shift that had never shifted before. We talked about the challenges of two broken people building something together and the daily choices that made it possible. And we talked about one of the most powerful things in this entire memoir: how two people who had both been through so much created a space between them where healing became possible for both of them. And now, from this foundation, from this love, this partnership, this daily choice to grow together, something extraordinary is about to be built. Because in the next chapter, we are going to talk about how Elisa DeFord took everything she had survived, everything she had learned, and turned it into an empire. How she built Dumb Blonde Productions. How she launched a podcast that would eventually reach millions of people. How a woman who once had nothing built something that the world could not ignore. So stay with me, because this next chapter is where the Real Rise begins. And it is absolutely everything. Chapter 11. Building Dumb Blonde Productions. I want you to think about something. Think about every label that was ever put on you. Every time someone looked at you and decided what you were worth. Every time someone dismissed you, underestimated you, wrote you off before you even had a chance to show them who you really were. Now imagine taking every single one of those labels, every dismissal, every underestimation, every moment someone decided you were not enough, and turning it into something powerful. Not to prove them wrong. Not out of anger. Not out of bitterness. But simply because you finally understood that their opinion was never the truth. That is exactly what Elisa DeFord did. She took the name that could have been an insult. She took the personality that people had tried to make her feel embarrassed about. She took the story that she had once been ashamed of, and she built an empire from all of it. Welcome to the story of how Dumb Blonde Productions was born. How a woman who had nothing built something that millions of people now turn to every single week. And what it actually took to get there. How she turned her personality, her hustle, and her story into a business. Let us start with something that Bunnie Xo is very clear about in her memoir. She did not build her business by becoming someone different. She built it by becoming more herself, fully, unapologetically, without shrinking, without filtering, without editing herself to fit into someone else's idea of what success should look like. And that, in an industry full of carefully constructed images and perfectly managed personas, was actually her greatest competitive advantage. Because authenticity is rare. Real, unfiltered, completely honest authenticity, the kind that makes people feel like they are talking to a real person, rather than watching a performance, that is something that people hunger for. And Bunnie Xo had it in abundance. She had always had it. The problem was that for most of her life she had been told that the things that made her authentic were things to be ashamed of. Her past, her background, her loud personality, her willingness to say exactly what she thought without worrying too much about how it landed. These were the things that people had tried to make her feel small about. But they were also, exactly, the things that her audience would eventually love her for. Because here is the truth about building something real. You cannot build it from pretending. You cannot build a genuine connection with an audience while wearing a mask. People can feel inauthenticity. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it, and they do not trust it. Bunnie Xo understood this, instinctively. And so, when she started building, she did not build a character. She did not create a persona, designed to appeal to the widest possible audience. She just showed up, as herself, with her humor, with her directness, with her willingness to talk about things that most people were afraid to say out loud. Her past, her mistakes, her struggles, her recovery, her relationship, her opinions on everything, delivered with a combination of sharp wit and genuine warmth that made people feel like they had found a real friend. Not a celebrity, not an influencer, a friend. And that feeling of genuine friendship, of real connection, is the foundation on which Dumb Blonde Productions was built. But authenticity alone does not build an empire. Authenticity, combined with hustle, does. And Bunnie Xo had both, in abundance. She worked, not in a way that looked glamorous, not in a way that made great content by itself, but in the quiet, unglamorous, unsexy way that real building actually requires. Long hours, consistent output, showing up, even when the numbers were small, even when the growth felt slow, even when it would have been easy to wonder if any of it was actually working. She kept showing up, because she believed in what she was building, not blindly, not naively, but with the specific, hard-earned confidence of someone who has been through enough to know that she was capable of more than most people expected from her. The birth of the Dumb Blonde podcast and its explosive growth. Now let us talk about the podcast, because the Dumb Blonde podcast is not just a business story. It is a story about what happens when someone finds their platform, their voice, the specific, unique, completely irreplaceable thing that only they can offer, and they give it without holding back. The podcast started the way most great things start, simply, without the expectation of what it would become. Bunnie Xo started it because she had things to say, stories to share, conversations she wanted to have with interesting people about real things, not polished things, not safe things, real things, the kind of conversations that most podcasts were not having, because most podcasts were playing it safe. Most content creators were staying within the lines of what was acceptable, what was comfortable, what was unlikely to offend or challenge or make anyone feel uncomfortable. And Bunnie Xo had never been interested in playing it safe. She had spent too much of her life being told to play it safe, being told to be quieter, smaller, more palatable. And she was done with that. So she launched the Dumb Blonde podcast with one simple promise to her audience: real conversations with real people about real things, no filters, no sugarcoating, no carefully managed, public relations approved, perfectly sanitized version of the truth, just the truth. And people responded immediately, powerfully. in numbers, that nobody had predicted. Because that is what happens when someone gives people what they have actually been hungry for. The growth was not slow and steady. It was explosive. People did not just listen to the podcast. They told other people about it. They shared it. They quoted it. They felt, for the first time in a long time, like they had found a space where someone was finally saying the things they had always thought but never heard anyone say out loud. Bunnie Xo's willingness to be vulnerable, to talk about her own past, her own mistakes, her own journey, created something that is almost impossible to manufacture. Trust. Real, genuine, deeply felt trust between a host and her audience. And trust is the currency on which all real businesses are built. The more she shared, the more people listened. The more people listened, the bigger the platform grew. The bigger the platform grew, the more doors opened. More guests, more opportunities, more reach, more impact. And through all of it, Bunnie Xo never lost sight of why she started. Not for the numbers, not for the fame, but for the person on the other end of the microphone. The one who was driving to work, or doing the dishes, or lying awake at night and hearing something that made them feel a little less alone, a little more understood, a little more hopeful about their own story. That person was always her reason. What it took to go from nothing to number one. Now let us talk about something that does not always make it into the success stories. The real cost of building something from nothing. Because it is easy to hear she went from nothing to the #1 podcast on Apple and imagine that the journey was somehow smooth, somehow inevitable, somehow a matter of talent being recognized. But that is not how it works. That is never how it works. Going from nothing to #1 required things that nobody sees in the final result. It required failure, episodes that did not perform the way she hoped, ideas that did not land, moments of genuine self-doubt where she wondered if she was fooling herself, if this was really working, if the next episode would be the one where it all fell apart. It required consistency in the face of uncertainty, showing up and recording and putting content out when there was no guarantee that anyone was watching, when the numbers were not impressive, when the feedback was not all positive, when the easy thing would have been to quietly stop. It required thick skin, because building something publicly means failing publicly. It means putting yourself out there in a way that invites criticism, and not all of the feedback was kind. Not everyone appreciated her approach. Not everyone understood what she was building. Some people dismissed her. Some people tried to undermine her. Some people used the very things she had been most vulnerable about against her. And she kept going anyway. Not because she was immune to the criticism, not because it did not sting, but because she had learned something from everything she had been through. The opinion of someone who is not in the arena with you does not get to decide whether you stay in the arena. Only you get to decide that. And she decided to stay. Every single time. Bunnie Xo also talks about the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people as the platform grew. Because building alone only takes you so far. At some point, you need people. The right people. People who believe in the vision. Who bring skills that you do not have. Who are committed to something beyond just a paycheck. And finding those people, building that team, that community, that ecosystem was its own kind of work, its own kind of challenge, but also its own kind of reward. Because when you build something, with the right people around you, the thing you build is always bigger than anything you could have built alone. What this chapter teaches us. Before we close, I want to share something that sits at the heart of everything Bunnie Xo says about her business journey. She says, "Your story is not a liability. It is your greatest asset. The things you have been through, the places you have come from, the version of yourself that you had to fight to become, all of it is your material. All of it is your value. All of it is the thing that makes you completely irreplaceable, because nobody else has your story. Nobody else has your specific combination of experience and perspective and hard-earned wisdom. And in a world full of people trying to be like everyone else, the most powerful thing you can do is be exactly like yourself." That is what Bunnie Xo did. She did not try to fit into someone else's idea of what a successful podcaster should look like. She created her own idea, from her own truth, from her own life, from the messy, complicated, completely unfiltered story of a girl from a trailer park in Vegas who decided that her story was worth telling. And she was right. It was worth telling. And millions of people tuned in every single week to prove it. So today we talked about something that goes far beyond business. We talked about what happens when a person fully embraces who they are and builds from that place of complete authenticity. We talked about the Dumb Blonde podcast, its birth, its explosive growth, and the real, unglamorous, deeply human work that it took to get there. And we talked about the most important business lesson in this entire memoir. Your story is not something to hide from. It is something to build from. And now, the building is in full swing. But in the next chapter, we are going to talk about something that exists alongside all of this success. Something that Bunnie Xo says is more important than any number on a podcast chart. Her marriage, her family, the real, daily, deeply personal work of building a life with Jason DeFord. A life that looks nothing like where either of them started, and everything like what they both always deserved. So stay with me, because this next chapter is one of the most beautiful ones in the entire book. Chapter 12, Love, Marriage, and a Real Family. I want you to think about something. Think about a person who has been through everything, who has experienced the worst that people can do to each other, who has been in relationships that destroyed pieces of them, one by one, who has been lied to, manipulated, hurt, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love them. Now imagine that same person, after all of that, choosing to love again. Not out of desperation, not out of loneliness, not out of the old patterns of needing someone to complete them, but out of genuine, clear-eyed, fully conscious choice. Choosing to open up again, to trust again, to build again, knowing the full cost of what it means to be vulnerable, knowing what it feels like when things go wrong, and choosing anyway. That is not weakness. That is one of the bravest things a human being can ever do, and Elisa DeFord did it. With Jason DeFord, in Nashville, far away from the trailer parks and the streets and the darkness that had once defined so much of her life. Today we talk about what they built together. Not a perfect story, not a fairy tale, something better than both of those things, something real. Building a genuine life with Jelly Roll in Nashville. Let us start with the setting, because Nashville represents something in this story that goes beyond geography. It represents a new beginning. A deliberate, chosen, intentional new beginning. Far from Las Vegas. Far from the places where the worst things happened. Far from the people and the environments that had made it so easy to fall back into old patterns. Nashville was where Elisa and Jason decided to plant something. Not just a home, a life. A real, intentional, carefully tended life that looked nothing like where either of them had started. And building that life was not just about the physical things, not just the house, not just the address. It was about creating an environment that supported who they were becoming, individually and together. Bunnie Xo talks about this in her memoir with such warmth and clarity. She talks about the deliberateness of the choices they made in building their life in Nashville, the decision to surround themselves with people who were genuinely good for them, the decision to create routines and habits and a daily life that reflected their values, not the values they had inherited from their difficult pasts, the values they had chosen, intentionally, after doing the hard work of figuring out what those values actually were. And building that kind of intentional life from scratch is not easy. It requires constant awareness, constant checking in with yourself and with each other, constant asking, is this who we want to be? Is this the kind of home we want to have? Is this the kind of life we are actually building, or have we just drifted here without realizing it? Those questions are not comfortable ones, but they are necessary, and Elisa and Jason were willing to ask them, because they had both come from lives where nobody asked those questions, where things just happened, where life was something that occurred to you rather than something you deliberately created, and they were determined to do it differently. Xo parenting, healing together, and choosing love every single day. Now let us talk about something that Bunnie Xo addresses with great honesty in her memoir, because their relationship was not just about the two of them. It was also about family, about children, about the incredibly complex, deeply meaningful, daily practice of co-parenting in a situation that came with its own unique challenges. Co-parenting is not simple under any circumstances. It requires communication, consistent, honest, sometimes difficult communication between people who may have very different histories, very different wounds, and very different approaches to the things that matter most. It requires putting the needs of a child above everything else, above personal differences, above old grievances, above the complications of adult relationships and their aftermath. And it requires something that does not come naturally to most people, especially those who grew up in environments where healthy cooperation was never modeled. It requires the willingness to keep showing up, even when it is hard, even when it is uncomfortable, even when every part of you would rather not. Bunnie Xo talks about navigating this with a level of honesty that is genuinely refreshing. She does not pretend that it was always smooth. She does not present a sanitized version of blended family life. She tells you exactly what it required: the work, the growth, the moments of getting it wrong and choosing to try again, the moments of getting it right and feeling the particular, irreplaceable satisfaction of knowing that a child is growing up in something healthier than what you had. That last part is something that Bunnie Xo speaks about with particular emotion in her memoir, because for someone who grew up in the kind of home she grew up in, giving a child a different experience, a safer, more stable, more loving experience is not just a personal achievement. It is a breaking of a cycle, a deliberate, conscious, deeply meaningful decision that the patterns she inherited stop here. They do not get passed down. They do not become someone else's inheritance. They end with her. And the healing that she and Jason found together was not just about them. It was about what they were able to give to the people around them, the family they were building, the environment they were creating, the example they were setting of what it looks like when two people choose to grow instead of staying stuck. Bunnie Xo also talks about something that is at the heart of everything she and Jason have built: the daily choice to love. Not the feeling of love, not the emotion that shows up on good days and in beautiful moments. The choice, the active, daily, sometimes difficult, completely intentional choice to show up for each other, to be patient when patience is hard, to be honest when honesty is uncomfortable, to choose the relationship over the ego, to choose growth over comfort, to choose, again and again, the version of themselves and each other that they are becoming, rather than the version they used to be. That is what love looks like in practice, not the highlight reel, the daily choice. And it is one that Elisa and Jason make every single day. What a real healthy relationship actually looks like after so much pain. Now here is the part of this chapter that I think is the most important, because Bunnie Xo does something in her memoir that is incredibly valuable. She does not just tell you about her relationship, she shows you what a healthy relationship actually looks like after pain, after trauma, after years of accepting less than you deserve. And the picture she paints is not what most people expect, because most people think that a healthy relationship looks easy, that it flows naturally, that if it is right, it should not require much work, that conflict means something is wrong, that struggle means incompatibility. But Bunnie Xo says something entirely different. She says a healthy relationship is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of safety within the difficulty. It is knowing that when things get hard, and they will get hard, the person across from you is not your enemy. They are your partner in figuring it out, in working through it, in coming out on the other side of the hard thing closer than you were before it happened. That is what she and Jason have. Not a relationship without conflict, but a relationship where conflict is handled with respect, where difficult conversations happen because both people value the relationship enough to have them, where mistakes are made because both people are human and then acknowledged and learned from and not held as weapons, where both people are allowed to be works in progress, allowed to still be healing, allowed to have bad days and difficult moments and times when the old wounds make themselves known, without being judged for it, without being made to feel like their humanness is a burden, and that, after everything Elisa had been through, was revolutionary. To be with someone who did not require her to be finished healing before he would love her, who loved her in the process, in the middle of it, not despite the mess, but including it. Bunnie Xo also talks about something that so many people who have been through trauma need to hear. She talks about the fact that healthy love felt uncomfortable at first, because it was unfamiliar, because she was so used to love feeling like drama, like uncertainty, like constantly having to prove herself, like waiting for the inevitable moment when it would fall apart. That when love arrived, and it was calm when it was consistent, when it showed up, the same way, on Wednesday, as it did on Saturday. Part of her did not know what to do with that. Part of her was suspicious of it. And she is honest about the work it took to let herself receive it. To stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. To stop sabotaging something good simply because good felt foreign. That work was as important as any other part of her journey. Learning to receive love. Learning to trust it. Learning to believe that she deserved it, not because she had earned it, not because she had finally become perfect enough, but simply because she was human. And humans deserve love. All of them, including the ones who have been through the most. Especially the ones who have been through the most. What this chapter teaches us. Before we close, I want to leave you with something that sits at the very heart of this chapter. Bunnie Xo wants people to know that healthy love is available to them. Not someday. Not after they have fixed everything. Not once they are fully healed. Now, as they are, in the middle of their journey, with their imperfections, and their scars, and their still healing wounds, they deserve love. Real love. The kind that sees them fully. The kind that stays. The kind that grows alongside them. But she also wants people to know that finding that love starts with something internal. It starts with the work you do on yourself, with the patterns you break, with the wounds you tend to, with the decision to show up for yourself before you can truly and healthily show up for anyone else. Because the love you accept from others will always reflect the love you have for yourself, and the healthier your relationship with yourself becomes, the healthier the relationships you attract will be. So today, we went inside the most personal part of Bunnie Xo's story. We talked about building a genuine life with Jelly Roll in Nashville. We talked about co-parenting, healing together, and the daily choice to love not as a feeling, but as a decision. And we talked about what a real, healthy relationship actually looks like after so much pain. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and safe, and worth every bit of the work it takes to maintain it. And now we are almost at the end of this incredible journey, because in the next chapter, we are going to take a step back and see the full picture. The complete arc of Elisa DeFord's story. From the trailer parks to the mansions. From nothing to everything. From the girl who had no idea if she would survive to the woman who built an empire from her scars. So stay with me, because the next chapter is the one where everything comes full circle. And it is absolutely worth waiting for. Chapter 13, From Trailer Parks to Mansions. I want you to imagine something. Imagine standing in a beautiful home, a real home, warm, stable, safe, the kind of home that you once could not have imagined belonging to you. And then, I want you to imagine looking out the window and seeing not what is in front of you, but everything that is behind you. Every hard road, every dark night, every moment you were not sure you would make it, every person who told you that you would never amount to anything, every version of yourself that you had to leave behind to become who you are now. Imagine standing there with all of that in the background and realizing, fully, completely, without a single doubt, that you made it. Not because someone handed it to you. Not because you got lucky. Not because the universe decided to be kind for once, but because you chose it every single day, even when choosing it was the hardest thing you had ever done. That moment is what this chapter is about. The full circle moment. The moment when Elisa DeFord, the girl from the trailer parks of Las Vegas, stood in her home in Nashville and allowed herself to feel exactly how far she had come. And today, we are going to stand there with her. The full circle moment of looking back at how far she had come. There is something that happens when a person reaches a certain point in their journey. A point where they have enough distance from where they started to actually see the full picture, not just the destination, the whole road, every turn, every detour, every moment of doubt and despair and almost giving up, and every moment of choosing to keep going anyway. For Elisa DeFord, that full circle moment did not arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces, in quiet, unexpected, completely ordinary moments that suddenly hit differently. The first time she walked into a home that was hers, not borrowed, not temporary, not a place she was staying until something fell apart, hers, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, the particular, irreplaceable feeling of safety that comes with truly belonging somewhere. The first time she looked at her business, at Dumb Blonde Productions, at the podcast, at everything she had built, and realized that nobody had given it to her. Nobody had handed her a shortcut. Nobody had opened a door out of pity or charity or connection. She had built every single part of it with her own hands, her own mind, her own relentless, stubborn, completely undefeatable will to create something from nothing. The first time she sat across from Jason in a moment of quiet, ordinary, everyday life and realized that this was real, that this was not going to fall apart, that she had not just found a good relationship, she had built one, day by day, choice by choice, work by work. Bunnie Xo talks about these moments in her memoir with a tenderness that is deeply moving, because she does not take them for granted. She cannot take them for granted, because she knows exactly what they cost. She knows exactly what had to happen, what had to be survived, what had to be released for these moments to be possible, and that knowledge makes every single one of them feel like a miracle, not a miracle that fell from the sky, a miracle that she built from the wreckage of everything that once tried to break her. And here is what she says about that full circle feeling. It does not feel the way people expect it to feel. It does not feel like triumph. It does not feel like victory. It feels like peace, a deep, settled, quiet peace that says, you did it. You actually did it. And you did it yourself. What success actually feels like when you built it yourself. Now let us talk about success, because Bunnie Xo has a very specific, very honest, very important thing to say about it. Success that you build yourself feels completely different from success that is handed to you. And the difference is not just emotional. It is fundamental. It changes the way you carry it, the way you relate to it, the way you use it, the way you understand it. When success is handed to you, it can be taken from you by the person who gave it, by the circumstance that created it, by the change in the world that makes the old advantage irrelevant. But when success is built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day by your own hands, it cannot be taken from you, because it lives inside of you, not just in the bank account, not just in the podcast numbers, not just in the house in Nashville, inside of you, in the person you became in the process of building it. And that person, that specific, hard one, deeply formed person is something that nobody can take. Bunnie Xo talks about this, with such clarity, in her memoir. She says, the success did not change her life. The becoming changed her life. The work of becoming, the kind of person who could build something real, that is what transformed everything. The success was just the evidence of the transformation, and that distinction is everything, because so many people are chasing success as if it is the thing that will finally make them feel okay, finally make them feel worthy, finally make them feel like they are enough. But Bunnie Xo knows, from lived experience, that success does not create that feeling. You have to create that feeling first. You have to do the inner work first. You have to build yourself first. And then, the outer success, when it comes, does not feel like something you desperately needed. It feels like something you genuinely and deeply earned. And those are two very different experiences of the same outcome. She also talks about something that surprised her about success. She thought that reaching a certain level would feel like arrival, like finally being done, like being able to exhale completely and stop working so hard. But that is not what happened. What happened instead was that success opened new doors, created new challenges, raised new questions, presented new opportunities to grow in ways she had not anticipated. And she found that the version of her who had survived everything she had survived was actually perfectly equipped to keep growing, because growth was not new to her. Growth was all she had ever done, even in the darkest times, even when it did not look like growth from the outside. She had been growing, always, and success just gave that growth a bigger stage. The scars she carries and why she would not change a single one. Now we come to the most powerful part of this chapter. The part that Bunnie Xo speaks about with a depth and a conviction that is impossible to forget. The scars. Because Elisa DeFord carries scars. Real ones. Not metaphorical. Not the kind of scars that are easy to dress up as character-building lessons. Real, deep, sometimes still tender scars from everything she has been through. From the childhood that did not protect her. From the streets that exposed her to things no young person should ever face. From the addiction that took years from her life. From the abuse that left marks on the way she saw herself and the world. From the darkest nights that she was not sure she would survive. She carries all of it. She does not pretend that it is not there. She does not present a version of herself that has been so thoroughly healed that the past has been erased. Because it has not been erased. It is part of her, permanently, indelibly. And here is what Bunnie Xo says about those scars. She would not change a single one. Not one. And I want to be really clear about what that means. Because this is not toxic positivity. This is not everything happens for a reason. This is not a dismissal of real pain or real trauma or the very real cost of what she went through. She is not saying that what happened to her was okay. She is not saying that she is glad it happened. She is saying something much more nuanced, much more powerful, much more true. She is saying that the person she became because of everything she went through is someone she is genuinely proud of, and she cannot have that person without the journey that created her. She cannot have the resilience without the things that required resilience. She cannot have the empathy without the pain that taught her what pain feels like. She cannot have the wisdom without the mistakes that made her wise. She cannot have the voice that millions of people now trust and turn to without the story that made that voice credible, authentic, real. Because here is the thing about Bunnie Xo's power as a communicator. It does not come from her education. It does not come from her credentials. It does not come from having had an easy life that she can offer as a template. It comes from exactly the opposite. It comes from the fact that she has been through the worst and come out the other side. It comes from the fact that when she says, "I understand," she actually, completely, and undeniably, does. And that understanding is her greatest gift to her audience. That understanding is the thing that makes people feel less alone, less broken, less beyond hope. The scars are not in spite of her success. They are part of the reason for it. They are the proof of the journey, the evidence of survival, the map of a life fully lived. And she wears them, not with shame, but with the quiet, dignified, hard-earned pride of someone who knows exactly what they cost. What this chapter teaches us. Before we close, I want you to think about your own scars, the things you have been through, the parts of your story that you are most ashamed of, the chapters that you would rather nobody knew about, the versions of yourself that you have been trying to put as much distance between you and them as possible. And I want you to consider something that Bunnie Xo offers in this chapter. What if those scars are not your shame? What if they are your story? What if the very things you most want to hide are the very things that make you most human, most relatable, most capable of connecting with other people who are carrying the same things? What if your greatest pain, properly understood, properly processed, properly owned, is actually your greatest strength? Bunnie Xo is not just a success story. She is proof of something deeply important, that there is no version of a person that is beyond redemption. No background too broken, no past too dark, no set of mistakes too many. Every single person who is willing to do the work, to look honestly at themselves, to break the cycles, to choose differently, one day at a time, has access to a different story. Their own different story, built from their own specific, unique, completely irreplaceable version of the journey. And that story, whatever it looks like, is worth telling. So today, we stood in the full circle moment. We looked back at the road that brought Elisa DeFord from the trailer parks of Las Vegas to the mansions of Nashville. We talked about what success actually feels like when you built it yourself, not like triumph, but like peace. And we talked about the scars she carries and why, after everything, she would not change a single one, because they made her who she is. And who she is extraordinary. But now we have arrived at the final chapter, the one that brings everything full circle, the one where Bunnie Xo delivers her final message to every person who has ever felt too broken, too lost, too far gone to rise, the one where she looks you directly in the eye and says what she has been building toward this entire time. So stay with me for one last chapter, because the final word of this story is one that you are going to want to carry with you long after this video ends. Chapter 14, Stripped Down, the Final Truth. We have arrived at the final chapter of one of the most raw, most honest, most completely unfiltered stories that has ever been put on a page. And before we go any further, I want you to take a moment, just a moment, to acknowledge how far we have traveled in this story. We started in the trailer parks of Las Vegas. with a little girl who had nothing, no stability, no safety, no one in her corner telling her that she mattered. We followed her through the streets, through the addiction, through the abuse, through the darkest nights that a person can survive. We watched her fall, further than most people ever fall, and we watched her, at the very bottom, make a decision, a quiet, fierce, completely unremarkable decision that changed the entire trajectory of her life. We watched her break cycles, build herself back up, find love, build an empire, find her way from nothing to everything. And now we are here, at the final truth, the thing that Bunnie Xo has been building toward from the very first page, the message that she wrote this entire book to deliver. And it is a message, not just for the people who have been through what she has been through. It is a message for every single person who has ever struggled, who has ever fallen, who has ever wondered if they were too broken to ever be whole again. This chapter is for all of them, and today we deliver it, together, the message she wants every struggling person to hear. Let us start with the person Bunnie Xo wrote this book for. Not the person who has it all figured out. Not the person whose life is going exactly as planned. Not the person who wakes up every morning feeling confident and clear and completely certain of their own worth. She wrote it for the person who is struggling, the one who is in the middle of something hard, something that feels like it will never end, something that has been going on for so long that they have started to wonder if this is just the way their life is going to be. She wrote it for the person who looks at their past and feels, not just sadness about it, but shame. The specific, heavy, suffocating shame of believing that what they have done, or what was done to them, makes them less, makes them unworthy, makes them the kind of person who does not get the good things. She wrote it for the person who has tried to change and fallen back into old patterns and taken that fall as evidence that change is not possible for them, that they are the exception to every hopeful story they have ever heard. She wrote it for the person who has been told, by life and by the people in it, that they do not matter, that they are not worth saving, that the ceiling above them is the best they can expect. And here is the message that Bunnie Xo has for that person. Every single word of your story matters, even the darkest ones, especially the darkest ones, because the darkness is not evidence that you are beyond hope. It is evidence that you have survived something real, something hard, something that required a level of strength that you may not even recognize in yourself because you were too busy just getting through to notice how extraordinary the getting through actually was. You are not a cautionary tale. You are a survival story. And survival stories do not end at the bottom. They end at the rise. Why no one is too broken, too lost, or too far gone to rise. Now let us talk about something that Bunnie Xo says with absolute conviction throughout her memoir. No one is too broken to rise. No one. Not the person with the longest list of mistakes. Not the person with the most complicated past. Not the person who has hurt people along the way. Not the person who has been so deep in addiction that they could barely remember who they were before it. Not the person who has been in so many wrong relationships that they have almost forgotten what right feels like. Not the person who has hit rock bottom more than once. None of them. None of you. And Bunnie Xo does not say this as a platitude. She does not say it because it sounds nice. She says it because she is the proof. She is the evidence. She is the living, breathing, completely undeniable example of what becomes possible when a person decides that they are not done yet. Think about where she started. Think about everything that was stacked against her. The poverty, the neglect, the abuse, the addiction, the years of making choices that took her further from herself instead of closer. The moments where she was not sure she would see the next day. By every conventional measure, by everything that the world uses to predict outcomes, Elisa DeFord was not supposed to make it. She was not supposed to rise. She was not supposed to build an empire. She was not supposed to become one of the most trusted voices in podcasting. She was not supposed to have the life she has. And she has it anyway, because she decided that the conventional measure was wrong, that the world's prediction did not get the final word, that the story was not finished just because it looked like it was. And she wants you to know that the same is true for you. Whatever you have been through, whatever you have done, whatever the world has decided about your potential, it does not get the final word. You do. You always did. And the moment you decide to take that word back, the moment you decide that your story is not finished, everything becomes possible. Not easy, not quick, not without more hard work, more setbacks, more moments of wondering if any of it is worth it, but possible. Genuinely, completely, undeniably possible. The hard truth about redemption. Before we get to Bunnie Xo's final words, I want to share something that she is very honest about in her memoir, because she does not present redemption as something that just happens. She is very clear about what it actually requires. Redemption is not passive. It is not something that arrives while you are waiting. It is not a reward for suffering enough. It is not something that the universe delivers at the right moment. Redemption is active. It is a choice, made every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. The choice to look honestly at yourself. The choice to do the uncomfortable work of understanding your own patterns. The choice to stop blaming and start taking responsibility, not for what was done to you, but for what you do with what was done to you. Because that distinction is where all the power lives. You did not choose what happened to you, but you choose what happens next. And that choice is yours. Completely. No matter what your circumstances look like. No matter how limited your resources feel. No matter how many times you have tried and fallen short. The next choice is always available. The next step is always possible. And redemption is always one decision away. That is the hard truth, and the beautiful truth, of Bunnie Xo's message. It is hard, because it puts the responsibility squarely on your shoulders. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody can do this for you. Nobody can make the choices that only you can make. But it is beautiful, for exactly the same reason. Because it means that nobody can take it from you either. Your redemption is yours. Completely. Waiting whenever you are ready to reach for it. Her final words of wisdom, hope, and unapologetic encouragement. And now we arrive at the final words. The ones that Bunnie Xo leaves you with at the close of her memoir. The ones that she wants you to carry long after you have finished reading. Long after this video ends. Long after today. The first thing she wants you to know is this. Your past is not a prison. It is a chapter. And chapters end. New ones begin. The chapter you are in right now, no matter how dark, how difficult, how permanent it feels, is not your final chapter. It is just where the story currently is. And stories move forward. Always. The second thing she wants you to know is this. The version of yourself that you are most ashamed of is not the truest version of you. The truest version is the one that is still here, still breathing, still reaching for something better, still showing up for the next day, even when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. That version is your real version, and that version is enough to build from. The third thing she wants you to know is this: you do not have to have it all figured out before you start. You do not have to be healed before you begin. You do not have to be confident, or clear, or certain, or ready before you take the next step. You just have to take it. One small, imperfect, completely uncertain step in the direction of something better, and then another, and then another, because that is how every transformation in the history of human life has ever happened, not in one dramatic moment, in thousands of small, daily, completely ordinary moments where a person chose differently than they had before. The fourth thing she wants you to know is something that she says with her whole heart. You are not irredeemable. No matter what you have done, no matter what has been done to you, no matter how far you have fallen, no matter how many times, you are not irredeemable, because redemption is not reserved for the people with the cleanest records. It is available to the people with the most complicated ones, to the people who have made the worst mistakes, to the people who have lived in the darkest places, to the people who have been told by everyone around them, and sometimes by their own inner voice, that they are too far gone. They are not too far gone. You are not too far gone. And Bunnie Xo is the proof. What stripped down really means. Before we close, I want to talk about the title of this book, because it is not an accident. Stripped down. It does not just refer to Elisa's story. It refers to an approach, a philosophy, a way of being in the world, stripped of the filters, stripped of the performance, stripped of the carefully managed image, stripped of the version of yourself that you present to the world, and left with the real one, the one underneath everything, the one that has been there all along, waiting to be seen, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for you to stop running from it and start building from it. Because the stripped-down version of you, the real, unfiltered, imperfect, completely authentic version, is actually your most powerful version. Not your most polished, your most powerful. Because authenticity connects, vulnerability heals, truth liberates, and the moment you stop hiding behind the version of yourself that you think the world wants to see and start showing up as the version you actually are, something extraordinary happens. You stop performing, you start living, and the difference between those two things is everything. Final words. So this is it. The end of Bunnie Xo's story. Or rather, the end of this chapter of her story. Because her story is not over. Not even close. She is still building, still growing, still showing up every single day for her podcast, her family, her audience, herself. Still proving with every episode, every honest conversation, every moment of genuine connection that the girl from the trailer parks of Las Vegas was always exactly who she was supposed to be. She just had to survive long enough to find out. And now I want to leave you with something. Not advice, not a list of steps, just a question. A simple, honest, completely personal question that Bunnie Xo's story asks of every person who encounters it. What is your stripped-down truth? Not the version of your story that you tell at dinner parties. Not the version that makes you look the most capable, the most successful, the most together. The real version. The one underneath everything. The one with the struggles, and the scars, and the chapters you are not proud of. and the resilience, the growth, the moments of choosing differently, the slow, quiet, completely unglamorous rise. What does that story look like? Because that story is your most powerful one, and the world needs to hear it. Maybe not from a podcast, maybe not from a book, maybe just from you, to the one person in your life who needs to know that they are not alone, that they are not too broken, that they are not too far gone, that their story is not finished. Be that voice for someone, the way Bunnie Xo was that voice for you today. Because that is how the cycle, finally, completely and permanently breaks. One honest story at a time.